The workshop door slammed open with enough force to rattle the metal shelves. Luke Harper didn't flinch. Years of single fatherhood had taught him to distinguish real emergencies from dramatic entrances. But when Evelyn Ross, CEO of the city's most powerful development firm, stumbled into his fabrication shop at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, mascara streaked and trembling, he knew his quiet, controlled world was about to shatter. "I need you to pretend to be my husband," she said, her voice barely steady. "Tomorrow night. One dinner. Or my father will take everything, including the contracts that keep your son fed." Luke's hands stilled on the steel he'd been grinding. In 6 years of raising Jason alone, he'd learned that some decisions changed everything. This was one of them. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below and hit that like button. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The evening had started like any other Tuesday. Luke Harper stood in his workshop, safety glasses pushed up onto his forehead, studying the blueprints spread across his work table. The overhead fluorescents hummed their familiar rhythm, and the faint smell of cutting oil and metal shavings filled the air, scents that had become as familiar as home. Outside, the October darkness pressed against the windows, but inside, everything was exactly as it should be. Controlled, predictable, safe. His phone buzzed. Jason's name lit up the screen. "Dad? Mrs. Chen says I can stay an extra hour if you need. We're building a volcano for the science fair." Luke smiled despite himself. "That woman's a saint. Tell her I'll pick you up at 8:30. And Jay, don't use too much vinegar this time. Last volcano nearly took out her kitchen curtains." His son's laugh echoed through the speaker before the line went dead. 6 years. 6 years since Luke had become both mother and father, both provider and nurturer, both disciplinarian and comfort. 6 years since the car accident that had taken Sarah and left him holding a 3-month-old baby in a hospital room, surrounded by condolence cards and casserole dishes from neighbors who meant well but couldn't possibly understand the weight that had just settled onto his shoulders. He'd learned. He'd adapted. He'd built a life from the wreckage, a good life, even if it was smaller and quieter than the one he'd imagined. His fabrication shop provided steady work, his skills were in demand, and Jason was thriving. That was enough. It had to be enough. The steel sheet he'd been measuring was destined for a custom railing system, part of a larger contract with Ross Development Group. Evelyn Ross's company had been his biggest client for 3 years now, ever since she'd taken over from her semi-retired father and started modernizing the firm's approach. She valued quality over politics, paid on time, and never micromanaged. It was the kind of professional relationship Luke appreciated. Clean, efficient, respectful. He'd met her in person maybe half a dozen times, always at project sites, always surrounded by architects and contractors, always moving with the kind of purposeful energy that came from having too much to do and not enough hours to do it. She was probably in her mid-30s, tall and lean, with dark hair usually pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that noticed everything. Professional, competent, completely out of his world. Which was why, when his workshop door crashed open at 9:07 p.m., and Evelyn Ross herself stood in the doorway looking like she'd just survived a natural disaster, Luke's first thought was that something had gone catastrophically wrong with one of his installations. His second thought, as he took in her appearance, designer dress wrinkled and askew, heels in one hand, mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks, was that this had nothing to do with railings. "Miss Ross?" He set down his measuring tape, instinct already moving him toward her. "Are you hurt? Do you need me to call?" "I need you to pretend to be my husband." The words came out in a rush, desperate and raw. Luke stopped mid-step. "I'm sorry, what?" She stepped fully into the workshop, and he could see her hands shaking. "Tomorrow night, one dinner. My father is flying in from Boston with his lawyers and the board members he still controls. He's planning a hostile takeover of my company, and the only thing that might stop him is if he believes I'm stable, settled, married to someone who makes me look like less of a risk." Luke stared at her, his mind struggling to process the request. "You want me to. I know how it sounds." She dragged a hand through her hair, dislodging what remained of her professional appearance. "I know we barely know each other, but I've run out of options, and you're the only person I could think of who might understand what's at stake." "Why me?" The question came out sharper than he'd intended, but the whole situation felt surreal. You must know dozens of people more qualified for... Because you're not part of my world, she interrupted, her voice gaining strength. Everyone I know is connected to the business somehow. Everyone I might ask would use this against me later, or sell the information to my father, or turn it into leverage. But you... She met his eyes directly for the first time, and he saw something in her expression that reminded him uncomfortably of the way he'd felt 6 years ago, standing in that hospital room. Desperate. Drowning. Determined not to show it. You have a reputation, she continued. Your work is impeccable. You deliver on time. You don't play games or try to upsell. And you have a son to protect, which means you understand what it means to be responsible for someone other than yourself. Luke's jaw tightened at the mention of Jason. Leave my son out of this. I'm not threatening him. She took a step forward, and he noticed for the first time that she was barefoot now, her expensive heels discarded by the door. It made her seem smaller somehow, more vulnerable. I'm just stating a fact. You're a single father running a business that depends on contracts from firms like mine. If my father succeeds in taking over the company, the first thing he'll do is purge all the vendors I've brought in. He'll replace them with his old cronies, people who overcharge and underdeliver but know how to kiss the right rings. Your contracts will disappear within 6 months. The threat landed like a physical blow, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. Luke's fabrication shop was solid, but it wasn't diversified. 70% of his revenue came from Ross development contracts. If those dried up, he'd have maybe 4 months before he'd have to start laying off his 2 employees. 6 months before he'd be scrambling to keep the lights on. 8 months before he'd be looking at bankruptcy and trying to figure out how to explain to Jason why they were moving into a smaller apartment and why Dad couldn't afford soccer camp anymore. You're asking me to lie, he said quietly. I'm asking you to act. Evelyn's voice was steady now, the initial desperation replaced by something harder. 1 dinner, 3 hours, maximum. You show up, play the role of supportive husband, and help me convince a room full of skeptical board members that I'm not the unstable, emotional liability my father is painting me as. That's all. And what do I get out of it? Your contracts, extended for 5 years instead of annually, at a 20% increase to account for inflation, and your excellent work. Guaranteed payment terms, first right of refusal on all new projects. She rattled off the terms like she'd already prepared them. And afterward, I walk away. We go back to our professional relationship, and I never ask you for anything personal again. It was a good offer. It was a phenomenal offer, actually. The kind of financial security that would let Luke stop lying awake at night doing mental math about college funds and emergency repairs. The kind of stability that would let him breathe. But something about the whole situation made his skin crawl. Why don't you just hire an actor, he asked. Someone trained to do exactly this kind of thing. For the first time, something like a bitter smile crossed her face. Because my father would see through a performance in 30 seconds. He spent 40 years reading people, manipulating them, finding their weaknesses. He'd know if I brought in some stranger off the street. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was softer. But you're not a stranger. We have a documented professional relationship going back 3 years. There's a paper trail, photos of us at project sites. A logical narrative for how we might have gotten close. It's believable. Luke walked to his work table and braced his hands against the steel surface, staring down at the blueprints without really seeing them. Every instinct he'd developed over 6 years of careful, controlled living was screaming at him to say no, to walk away, to protect the safe, predictable world he'd built for himself and Jason. But that world wasn't actually safe, was it? Not if it could be destroyed by one vindictive executive with the right connections. What exactly would this dinner entail? He heard himself ask. Relief flooded Evelyn's face. 7 p.m. at the Harbor Club. Private dining room. My father, 3 board members and their spouses. You'd need a suit. I can have one tailored and delivered by tomorrow afternoon. Just show up, be polite, support whatever I say, and let me handle the business discussion. The whole point is for you to make me look stable and grounded by association. And you think I can do that? Luke turned to face her fully. Make a CEO look grounded? You're a single father who built a successful business while raising a young child alone. Evelyn's voice carried an odd note of respect. You show up to job sites in work boots and speak to architects like equals. You don't flinch around wealth or power because you've never needed either to know your own worth. Yes, I think you can do that. The observation was more insightful than Luke had expected. It also made him deeply uncomfortable because it suggested she'd been paying more attention to him than he'd realized. I have conditions, he said. Name them. First, Jason can't know about this. Whatever story we tell, it doesn't involve my son thinking his father is in a relationship that doesn't exist. Agreed. Second, after this dinner, you step into my world. You want me to play a role in yours? Fine. But you spend an evening with my friends, in my neighborhood, seeing how normal people actually live. No performance, no pretense. Just reality. Evelyn blinked, clearly not having expected that. Why? Because I want to know if you can respect people who don't have power, Luke said bluntly. If this is just you using someone convenient, I need to see that. And if it's something else, if you're actually capable of seeing past your own crisis, I need to see that too. A long silence stretched between them. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the street, its headlights briefly illuminating the workshop before plunging it back into shadow. Okay, Evelyn said finally. After the dinner, I'll come to your neighborhood, meet your friends, whatever you want. Third condition. Luke held up 3 fingers. The contract extension you're offering, I want it in writing before the dinner, signed and notarized. Because if this goes sideways, I'm not trusting a verbal promise from someone whose company is in the middle of a power struggle. For a moment, he thought she might be offended. Instead, she nodded. Smart. I'll have my lawyer draw it up first thing tomorrow morning. You'll have it by noon. Then I guess we have a deal. Luke extended his hand, and after a brief hesitation, Evelyn shook it. Her grip was firm, her palm cool and slightly rough, evidence of someone who worked with her hands more than her appearance suggested. Thank you. The words came out quietly, almost uncertain. You have no idea what this means. I have some idea, Luke said. I've been in situations where one decision determined whether everything fell apart or held together. It's not a good feeling. Something in Evelyn's expression shifted, a flash of recognition that was quickly buried. No, she agreed. It's not. She collected her shoes from by the door and paused on the threshold. The car will pick you up at 6:30 tomorrow. The suit will arrive by 3. If you have any questions, I'll figure it out, Luke interrupted. I'm good at adapting. After she left, the workshop felt too quiet. Luke stood in the middle of the space, surrounded by half-finished projects and the tools of his trade, and wondered what the hell he'd just agreed to. His phone buzzed. Mrs. Chen asking if he was on his way. Luke grabbed his keys and jacket, forcing his mind back to the immediate and familiar. Jason's volcano. The drive home. Tuesday evening routines that had nothing to do with CEOs or hostile takeovers or pretend marriages. But as he locked the workshop door behind him, he couldn't shake the memory of Evelyn Ross standing in his space, stripped of her armor, asking for help. There had been something genuine in that moment, something that reminded him uncomfortably of his own worst nights, when the weight of responsibility threatened to crush him, and there was no one to ask for help because asking meant admitting weakness he couldn't afford. He understood that feeling. Maybe too well. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made everything feel sharp and urgent. Luke dropped Jason at school, fielded calls from 2 suppliers, and was back at the workshop by 8:30. The contract extension arrived via courier at 11:47 a.m., exactly as Evelyn had promised. Luke read through it twice, called a lawyer friend to verify the language, and signed it at noon. The suit arrived at 2:30 p.m. in a garment bag with a note. Classic cut, charcoal gray, should fit based on measurements from your safety equipment orders. If alterations needed, call this number. ER. Luke tried it on in the workshop bathroom, feeling ridiculous. The suit fit perfectly, which was somehow more unsettling than if it had been wrong. It meant she'd paid attention to details most people wouldn't notice. By 6 p.m., he was showered, dressed, and staring at himself in his bedroom mirror with Jason chattering in the background about the science fair competition next week. "Dad, you look weird," his son announced from the doorway. "Why are you wearing that?" "Business dinner," Luke said, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time. It felt like a noose. "I need to meet with a client about a big project. Is it the tall lady who came to the shop last month? The one who knew what a TIG welder was? Luke paused. He'd forgotten Jason had been there that day, supposedly doing homework in the office, while Luke gave Evelyn a tour of a custom staircase installation. Yeah, that's her. She seemed nice. Jason flopped onto the bed, completely unconcerned. Mrs. Chen says I can stay until 9 if you need. We're going to watch a documentary about volcanoes. You're obsessed with volcanoes. They're awesome, Dad. They're like earth-burping fire. Despite everything, Luke smiled. That's definitely one way to describe it. Be good for Mrs. Chen, okay? And no trying to build an actual volcano in her kitchen. That was one time. The car that arrived at 6:30 was a sleek black sedan with a driver who opened the door without speaking. Luke slid into the back seat, feeling like an imposter in someone else's life. The Harbor Club occupied the top 3 floors of one of the city's oldest buildings, all brass fixtures and mahogany paneling and views of the waterfront that probably cost more per square foot than Luke's entire workshop. A hostess in a dress that cost more than his monthly mortgage payment guided him to a private dining room on the upper level. Evelyn was already there, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows with a glass of wine in her hand. She'd transformed back into her CEO persona, hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless, wearing a navy dress that was simultaneously professional and elegant. When she turned at his entrance, her expression was carefully neutral. Luke, thank you for coming. Her voice was polite, distant. The woman who'd shown up desperate in his workshop might as well have been a different person. Ms. Ross? He matched her formality instinctively, understanding that the performance had already begun. Please, call me Evelyn. We're not at a job site. She moved closer, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. The others will arrive in about 10 minutes. Before they do, we need our story straight. I figured you'd have that planned out already. I have a framework, but it needs to feel natural, which means you need to be comfortable with it. She set down her wine glass and faced him directly. We met 3 years ago when I took over the company and started reviewing vendor contracts. I was impressed by your work. We developed a professional relationship that gradually became personal. 6 months ago, we started dating quietly. Last month, we got married in a small ceremony, just immediate family and a few close friends. And why did we keep it quiet? Luke asked. Because I didn't want the board thinking I was making decisions based on personal relationships rather than business merit, and because you value your privacy and didn't want your business associated with corporate politics. It was plausible. More than plausible, actually. It aligned with everything the board would already know about both of them. What about Jason? The question came out more protectively than he'd intended. We're taking things slowly with him. He knows we're together, but we haven't made any big changes to living arrangements yet. You're putting his stability first, which anyone would respect. Evelyn's voice softened slightly. That part is actually true, isn't it? You would put his stability first. Always, Luke said flatly. Before she could respond, voices echoed from the hallway. Evelyn's posture shifted, shoulders back, chin up, the transformation instantaneous. They're here. Just follow my lead, support what I say, and this will be over before you know it. The door opened, and Luke got his first look at Gerald Ross. Evelyn's father was in his mid-60s, tall and barrel-chested, with steel-gray hair and the kind of commanding presence that came from decades of getting his way. He swept into the room like he owned it, which he probably had at some point. Behind him came 3 other couples, board members and their spouses, Luke assumed, all dressed in similar expensive variations of business formal. Evelyn, Gerald's voice boomed across the space, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. And this must be the mysterious husband I've heard absolutely nothing about. Luke felt the challenge in those words, the implication that he was nobody worth mentioning. Beside him, Evelyn's spine stiffened. Dad, meet Luke Harper. Luke, my father, Gerald Ross. Luke extended his hand, keeping his grip firm but not aggressive. Mr. Ross, I've heard a lot about you. I'm sure you have. Gerald's handshake was designed to intimidate, just enough pressure to make a point. Evelyn tells me you're in fabrication? Must be quite different from the corporate world. Different, but not less valuable, Luke said evenly. Someone has to build what the corporate world designs. A flicker of surprise crossed Gerald's face, quickly masked. The other board members were watching carefully, Luke noticed. evaluating this unexpected addition to the evening. The dinner that followed was an exercise in controlled warfare disguised as polite conversation. They sat at a table set with more silverware than Luke had ever seen in one place, while servers brought course after course of food he couldn't identify. Gerald dominated the conversation, steering it toward business with the subtlety of a freight train. "So, Evelyn," he said halfway through the second course, "I've been reviewing the financials you sent over. Some concerning patterns in your project selection. A lot of resources going toward what I'd call experimental ventures." "You mean investments in sustainable development and community-focused projects?" Evelyn's voice was crisp, professional. "Those aren't experiments, Dad. They're the future of urban development. They're risks." Gerald cut a piece of his steak with unnecessary precision. "Risks that the board didn't authorize and that are eating into profits that should be going to shareholders." One of the other board members, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. "Gerald has a point, Evelyn. The quarterly reports show declining profit margins in 3 consecutive quarters. Because we're building equity in long-term projects that will pay off substantially in 5 to 7 years, Evelyn countered. "This company can't survive on quick-flip developments forever. The market is changing." "The market is fine. Your judgment is what's concerning." Gerald set down his fork and leaned back, his expression hardening. "You're 34 years old, running a billion-dollar company with no real oversight since I stepped back. No partner to provide perspective, no family stability, making impulsive decisions based on idealistic notions." "I have a partner," Evelyn's voice cut through his building tirade. "And my decisions are based on comprehensive market analysis, not impulse." Gerald's eyes shifted to Luke with barely concealed disdain. "Ah, yes, the fabricator. Tell me, Mr. Harper, do you think you're qualified to advise my daughter on corporate strategy?" Every eye at the table turned toward Luke. He could feel Evelyn's tension beside him, could sense the trap Gerald was laying. If Luke claimed expertise, he'd look presumptuous. If he deferred, he'd validate Gerald's implication that Evelyn's personal life was a liability rather than an asset. Luke set down his own fork and met Gerald's gaze calmly. "I think I'm qualified to recognize when someone is competent and trustworthy. I've worked with your daughter for 3 years now. I've seen how she handles contractors, how she solves problems, how she treats people at every level of a project. She's fair, she's thorough, and she doesn't cut corners. Those qualities matter more than whether someone's ideas align with how things have always been done." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. One of the board members' wives smiled into her wine glass. Gerald's expression darkened. "That's a lovely testimonial, Mr. Harper. But business requires more than fairness and thoroughness. It requires vision, leadership, the ability to make hard decisions." "Like the decision to marry me?" Luke asked quietly. "That was pretty hard, actually. Choosing to build a life with someone when you're running a company and don't have time for distractions. Choosing to trust that your personal life can coexist with your professional responsibilities instead of assuming they're mutually exclusive." He paused, letting the implication settle. "That took more courage than most people ever show." Evelyn's hand found his under the table, her fingers briefly squeezing his in wordless gratitude. To anyone watching, it would look like an intimate gesture between spouses. Luke told himself that's all it was, part of the performance. But her hand was shaking slightly, he noticed, just like it had been last night in his workshop. Gerald opened his mouth to respond, but one of the other board members, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she missed nothing, spoke first. "I think what's concerning some of us, Evelyn, isn't your personal life. It's the question of whether you can balance competing priorities while maintaining the company's financial health. Your father built this firm from nothing. We all respect that. But we also need to see evidence that the next generation can preserve that legacy while adapting to new challenges." It was a more reasonable challenge, delivered without Gerald's barely concealed hostility. Evelyn straightened in her chair, clearly relieved to be addressing substance rather than personal attacks. "I understand that concern, Margaret, and I think the evidence is in the metrics you're not seeing yet. 3 of the 4 projects my father is calling experimental have already secured additional private investment from external firms impressed by our approach. 2 have received city commendations for community impact, and the fourth is being considered as a model for a federal development initiative that would bring substantial grant funding. The profit margins are lower right now because we're in the building phase, but the long-term value proposition is significantly higher than our traditional quick turnaround projects. She proceeded to outline specific numbers, projections, and partnerships with the kind of detailed precision that made it clear she hadn't just made impulsive decisions, she'd done her homework. Luke watched the faces around the table shift from skeptical to considering, even as Gerald's expression grew darker. The dinner continued for another hour, the conversation circling through various business topics, while Luke mostly stayed quiet and observed. He was good at that, watching, listening, understanding the dynamics beneath the surface conversation. It was a skill he'd developed on job sites, where the real decisions often happened in the margins rather than in formal meetings. What he saw disturbed him. Gerald Ross wasn't just concerned about the company's direction. He was threatened by his daughter's competence, resentful of her success, determined to reassert control not because she was failing, but because she was succeeding in ways he didn't understand or approve. It was the kind of toxic dynamic Luke had seen before, usually in families where love and control had gotten so tangled up that they were indistinguishable. The kind of situation where winning and losing mattered more than what was actually right. As coffee and dessert were served, Gerald made his final move. "I appreciate everyone's input tonight," he said, his voice deceptively pleasant, "but I think we all need to face facts. Evelyn has done some interesting work, but the company needs experienced leadership right now. I'm proposing that the board vote next month on a restructuring that would bring me back as active CEO, with Evelyn transitioning to a senior advisory role. It would provide stability, preserve the legacy we've built, and allow her more time to focus on her new marriage." He smiled at Luke like they were co-conspirators. "I'm sure you'd appreciate having your wife around more, Mr. Harper." The bastard was clever. He'd framed the takeover as being in everyone's best interest, including Luke's. Agreeing would make Luke look like a supportive husband. Disagreeing would make him look controlling or threatened by his wife's success. Luke took a sip of his coffee, buying time to think. Across the table, Evelyn had gone very still, her professional mask finally cracking enough to show the fury and fear beneath. This was the moment that mattered. Whatever he said next would either validate Gerald's narrative or challenge it, would either support Evelyn's position or undermine it. He thought about Jason, about the life he'd built as a single father, about every time someone had assumed he couldn't handle both work and parenting, about every condescending comment from other parents or teachers or clients who thought a man couldn't possibly manage what women did every day, about the quiet, constant battle to prove that being different didn't mean being less. "Actually, Mr. Ross," Luke said, setting down his cup with deliberate care, "I prefer my wife exactly as she is, competent, driven, and fully engaged with work that matters to her. I didn't marry someone who needs to be rescued from her own success. I married someone who knows her own worth and doesn't need anyone's permission to claim it." The silence that followed was absolute. Gerald's face flushed an unhealthy shade of red. "That's a very romantic notion, Mr. Harper, but business isn't about romance." "No," Luke agreed. "It's about results. And from what I've seen, your daughter delivers those. The question isn't whether she's capable. The question is whether this board has the courage to support a different approach instead of defaulting to what's comfortable." He stood, aware that he was probably breaking some kind of formal dinner etiquette, but past caring. "If you'll excuse us, I think my wife and I have fulfilled our obligation for the evening. Evelyn?" She rose smoothly, her professional mask back in place, but something new visible in her eyes. "Thank you all for coming. We'll reconvene next week to continue these discussions. Dad, we'll talk soon." They left together, Luke's hand resting lightly on the small of Evelyn's back. A gesture that looked natural, but was really about solidarity. Support. Two people facing something difficult as a unit, even if that unit was temporary and built on performance. The elevator ride down was silent. They walked through the lobby and out into the October night, where the black sedan waited at the curb. Only when they were both inside and the doors were closed did Evelyn finally speak. "Thank you." Her voice was rough, stripped of its professional polish. "You didn't have to do that. Didn't have to challenge him so directly." "Yes, I did." Luke loosened his tie, suddenly exhausted. He was using me as a weapon against you, so making it seem like your personal life was evidence of poor judgment. I wasn't going to stand there and let that happen. Still, you went further than our agreement required. She turned to face him in the dim interior of the car. That thing you said about marrying someone who doesn't need permission to claim her worth? That was true, Luke interrupted. Maybe not about us specifically, but true in general. People shouldn't have to shrink themselves to make others comfortable. Evelyn studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You surprise me, Luke Harper. Good. I'd hate to be predictable. A ghost of a smile crossed her face before fading. He's going to retaliate. My father. He won't take that public contradiction lightly, which means your contracts are guaranteed for 5 years signed and notarized, Luke reminded her. You held up your end. Whatever happens next with the company, I'm protected. But your reputation will be fine. I do good work. That speaks for itself. He paused. Besides, you still owe me an evening in my world. Remember? That was condition number 2. She blinked, clearly having forgotten in the chaos of the evening. You're serious about that? Completely. This weekend. I'm having some friends over for a barbecue. You'll come, you'll meet normal people doing normal things, and you'll see if you can handle being around those of us who don't have private dining rooms at the Harbor Club. For the first time all evening, Evelyn Ross laughed, a real laugh, startled and genuine. A barbecue? You want me to come to a barbecue? That's the deal. Okay. She settled back against the seat, looking simultaneously amused and apprehensive. I'll be there. Fair warning, though, I'm not very good at casual social situations. I noticed. Luke smiled slightly. But you're good at adapting. Let's see if that skill translates outside the boardroom. The car pulled up to his workshop where his truck waited in the small parking lot. Luke reached for the door handle, then paused. Evelyn, for what it's worth, you're doing the right thing, standing up to him, building something new instead of just maintaining what was. That takes real courage. She met his eyes in the darkness, and for a moment he saw the vulnerable woman from last night, the one who'd stumbled into his workshop desperate and afraid. I hope you're right, because if this goes badly, a lot of people will pay the price. Then we'll make sure it doesn't go badly. He said it with more confidence than he felt, but sometimes confidence was a choice rather than a certainty. Luke climbed out of the sedan and into his truck, the familiar seat and worn steering wheel a relief after the evening's strangeness. As he drove toward Mrs. Chen's house to pick up Jason, he tried to process what had just happened. He'd agreed to a simple transaction, one dinner in exchange for financial security. But somewhere between the Harbor Club's mahogany walls and Gerald Ross's barely concealed contempt, it had become something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like taking a side in someone else's war. The smart thing would be to step back now. Honor the contract, show up for the barbecue as promised, and then return to the safe boundaries of professional distance. But Luke had never been particularly good at staying safe when someone needed help. Jason was half asleep when Luke carried him from Mrs. Chen's apartment to the truck, the boy's head heavy against his shoulder. The science fair volcano sat carefully wrapped in newspaper on the passenger seat, its papier-mâché surface still tacky with paint. Did the meeting go okay? Mrs. Chen had asked at the door, her kind eyes assessing Luke's rumpled suit with the practiced concern of someone who'd helped raise Jason since he was an infant. Better than expected, Luke had told her, which was both true and completely inadequate to describe the evening's surreal complexity. Now, driving through quiet streets toward home, Luke glanced at his son's sleeping face in the rear-view mirror and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle back onto his shoulders. This was real. Jason, the workshop, the careful life they'd built together, that mattered. Whatever chaos was unfolding in Evelyn Ross's corporate world was temporary, a disruption that would pass and leave his actual life unchanged. He repeated that to himself like a mantra as he carried Jason upstairs, got him into pajamas without fully waking him, and tucked him into bed. Jason mumbled something about lava temperatures before burrowing deeper under his blankets, completely oblivious to the fact that his father had just spent 3 hours pretending to be married to a woman he barely knew. Luke stood in the doorway of Jason's room longer than necessary, watching his son sleep, reminding himself what mattered. 6 years of this. 6 years of being enough for both of them. He couldn't let anything threaten that stability. His phone buzzed as he finally turned away. A text from an unknown number. Contract extension filed with the City Licensing Board tonight. You'll have the official documentation Monday. Thank you again for this evening. ER. Luke stared at the message. She'd moved immediately to protect him, to fulfill her promises, even though the dinner had clearly gone badly by her standards. It spoke to an integrity he respected, even as it complicated his determination to maintain distance. He typed back, "Barbecue Saturday at 3 p.m. I'll send you the address. Dress casual." The response came quickly. "Understood. What should I bring?" Luke smiled despite himself. "Just yourself. And maybe lower expectations about the food." The next 2 days passed in a blur of normal routines that felt increasingly fragile. Luke completed the Ross development railing project, delivered it to the job site, and tried not to think about whether he'd see those contracts again after Gerald Ross's inevitable retaliation. He picked up Jason from school, helped with homework, supervised pizza dinners, and bedtime routines. Friday afternoon, his phone rang while he was adjusting a welding torch. The caller ID showed Marcus Webb, one of his oldest friends and a frequent barbecue attendee. "Please tell me you're still doing the thing tomorrow," Marcus said without preamble, "because Angela's been cooking sides since Wednesday, and if I have to eat another batch of experimental potato salad, I'm filing for divorce." "The barbecue's still on," Luke confirmed. "Why would it be canceled?" "Because word on the street is you had dinner at the Harbor Club with Evelyn Ross earlier this week, and people are talking." Marcus's voice carried equal parts curiosity and concern. "You want to tell me what's going on? Because the last time I checked, you avoided fancy restaurants like they personally offended you." Luke set down the torch, his stomach sinking. He'd underestimated how quickly information traveled in their interconnected network of contractors and tradespeople. Someone at the Harbor Club must have recognized him, or talked, or posted something on social media. "It was a business dinner," he said carefully. "New contract discussions. At the Harbor Club, with just the two of you." Marcus didn't sound convinced. "Luke, man, I've known you since trade school. You're the worst liar I've ever met. What's actually happening?" Luke closed his eyes, weighing his options. He could maintain the lie, but Marcus would see through it eventually. Or he could tell a version of the truth that wouldn't completely violate his agreement with Evelyn. "She needed a favor," he said finally. "A professional favor that required me to attend a dinner with her father and some board members. It's complicated corporate politics stuff, and I got pulled in because of our existing contracts. That's it." "That's it?" Marcus's skepticism was audible. "Because the way I heard it, you were introduced as her husband." "Where the hell did you hear that?" "Angela's cousin works at the Harbor Club. She texted Angela Wednesday night asking if you'd gotten secretly married and forgotten to tell anyone." Marcus paused. "So I'm asking as your friend, what's going on? Are you in some kind of trouble?" The genuine concern in Marcus's voice made Luke's chest tighten. He'd been so focused on protecting Jason and maintaining professional boundaries that he hadn't considered how this might affect his other relationships. Marcus and Angela had been there when Sarah died. They'd brought groceries when Luke was too exhausted to shop, had taken Jason for entire weekends when Luke needed to catch up on work, had never once made him feel like less because he was struggling. "I'm not in trouble," Luke said quietly. "But yeah, I told some people I was married to Evelyn Ross. It's temporary and it's complicated and I can't really explain why right now, but it's not real and it'll be over soon and I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Luke wondered if the connection had dropped. "Does this have anything to do with your contracts?" Marcus asked finally. "Protecting them was part of it, yeah." "Then I trust you." Marcus's voice was firm. "You've never made a reckless decision in your life, especially not where Jason's concerned. If you're doing this, you have good reasons. Angela will have questions, though. Fair warning." "I figured." Luke exhaled slowly. "And Marcus, Evelyn's coming to the barbecue tomorrow. I need everyone to be normal around her. No weird questions, no judgment, just regular Saturday afternoon with friends. Can you make that happen?" "You're bringing your fake wife to a barbecue." Marcus started laughing. "Man, your life got interesting fast. Yeah, I'll spread the word. Everyone will behave. Mostly because we're all dying to see what kind of person gets you to break your no dating rule, even if it's fake." After hanging up, Luke sat in his workshop office and tried to figure out how to explain Evelyn's presence to Jason. His son was sharp, observant, and had already commented on the tall lady who knew about welding equipment. If Evelyn showed up at their house for a social event, Jason would have questions. The solution came during dinner that night, while Jason was explaining the finer points of volcanic eruption patterns. "Hey, Jay," Luke interrupted gently. "You remember Mrs. Ross from my work? The CEO lady? Yeah, she was nice. She's coming to the barbecue tomorrow. I'm hoping to get some new projects from her company, and she wanted to meet some of the other contractors I work with, but she's kind of uncomfortable at casual social things, so I need you to help me make sure she feels welcome. Can you do that?" Jason considered this with the seriousness of a 6-year-old given an important mission. "Should I show her my volcano? Maybe not right away. Let her settle in first." Luke smiled. "But yeah, if she seems interested, you can give her the full volcanic presentation." "Cool. Is she going to eat hamburgers because Mrs. Chen says important business people only eat fancy food?" "She's going to eat whatever we're serving and be grateful for it," Luke said firmly. "Being important doesn't mean you get to be rude about other people's hospitality." Saturday arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that made Luke grateful to live where he did. Clear skies, temperature in the low 70s, just enough breeze to keep the heat comfortable. He spent the morning cleaning the small backyard of his rented duplex, setting up folding tables and chairs borrowed from various neighbors, and trying not to overthink what was about to happen. Marcus and Angela arrived first, bringing enough food to feed twice the expected crowd. Angela hugged Luke harder than usual, her dark eyes searching his face with the intensity of someone determined to assess his well-being. "You look tired," she announced. "Are you sleeping enough?" "I'm always tired. Single parent, remember?" Luke took a casserole dish from her hands. "And before you ask, yes, I'm eating properly, and no, I'm not going to explain the whole situation right now." "But there is a situation." Angela followed him into the kitchen. "Luke, we worry about you. You know that, right? You're so determined to handle everything alone that sometimes you forget it's okay to ask for help. I asked for Marcus's help yesterday, told him to make sure people were normal today." "That's not the kind of help I mean." She started arranging dishes on the counter with practiced efficiency. "I mean the kind where you admit when something's too heavy to carry by yourself." Luke turned to face her, leaning against the counter. "I'm okay, Angela. Really. This thing with Evelyn, it's weird and complicated, but it's also temporary. I'm not in over my head." "Famous last words," she muttered, but she hugged him again before heading back outside. Other guests trickled in over the next hour. Tom and Sarah Chen, Mrs. Chen's son and daughter-in-law, brought Jason a new book about geology. Kevin Martinez, who ran an electrical contracting business, arrived with his teenage daughter and a case of beer. Rachel Kim, an architect Luke had worked with on several projects, showed up with her partner and homemade kimchi. By 2:30, the backyard was full of conversation and laughter. The grill was heating up, and Jason was showing his volcano to anyone who would watch. It was exactly the kind of casual, comfortable gathering that made up Luke's real life. The community he'd built over years of showing up, being reliable, and treating people with respect. At 2:47 p.m., the doorbell rang. Luke found Evelyn on his front porch, looking profoundly uncomfortable in jeans and a plain blue sweater that probably cost more than his entire outfit, but at least made an effort at casual. Her hair was down, falling past her shoulders in a way he'd never seen, and she wasn't wearing any visible makeup. She looked younger somehow, and significantly more uncertain. "I know I'm early," she said immediately. "I wasn't sure about parking, or I can wait in my car if—" "You're fine. Come in." Luke stepped back to let her enter, noticing she was gripping a bakery box so tightly her knuckles were white. "What's that?" "Cookies. The woman at the bakery said chocolate chip cookies were appropriate for casual gatherings, but I wasn't sure if anyone had allergies, so I also got some that are nut-free and some that are gluten-free, and now I'm realizing I probably overthought this entire thing." She looked at him with something approaching panic. "I don't know how to do this, Luke. I don't know how to be normal at a barbecue." The admission was so raw and honest that Luke felt something shift in his chest. Nobody expects you to perform. Just be yourself. Talk to people. Eat food. Let Jason show you his volcano if he corners you. That's it. What if they all know about the dinner? About the fake marriage thing. They know something happened. They don't know details, and they're not going to ask because I asked them not to. These are good people, Evelyn. Give them a chance. She took a deep breath, clearly steeling herself, then nodded. Okay, let's do this. The backyard went quiet when they walked out together. Luke felt a dozen pairs of eyes assessing Evelyn, saw the surprise on several faces at her casual appearance, watched as people made rapid calculations about what her presence meant. Then Angela broke the silence with her usual warmth. You must be Evelyn. Luke said you were coming. I'm Angela Webb. My husband Marcus works with Luke sometimes. Can I get you something to drink? We have beer, wine, soda, or Marcus's lethal sweet tea that he swears isn't actually lethal, but definitely is. Evelyn's shoulders dropped slightly at the genuine welcome. Sweet tea sounds great, actually. Thank you. One potentially lethal beverage coming up. Angela grinned and headed toward the drink table. And just like that, the moment of tension broke. People resumed their conversations, though Luke noticed several still watching Evelyn with curiosity. He guided her toward a quieter corner of the yard where Rachel was setting up horseshoes with her partner. Rachel Kim, Evelyn Ross. Rachel's an architect. We worked together on that community center project last year. Rachel extended her hand with a professional smile that didn't quite hide her assessment. The Ross Development CEO. I've seen your work. The Riverside project you did downtown was impressive. Really thoughtful integration of public space and commercial development. Thank you. Though the public space component was a fight with the initial investors. Evelyn shook her hand, seeming more comfortable on familiar ground. They wanted maximum commercial footage, but the whole point was creating community value alongside profit. That's the eternal tension, isn't it? Rachel's smile became more genuine. Developers who actually care about urban planning versus those who just want maximum return. It's refreshing to meet someone in the former category. They fell into a discussion about zoning regulations and adaptive reuse that was clearly inside baseball for both of them. Luke stepped back, letting them talk, and found Marcus at his elbow. She's not what I expected, Marcus said quietly. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone more polished, more intimidating? She looks like she's terrified of saying the wrong thing. Luke glanced at Evelyn, who was gesturing animatedly while explaining something about green roof installations to Rachel. She's out of her element. This isn't her world. But she showed up anyway. Marcus took a sip of his beer. That says something. Before Luke could respond, Jason materialized at his side, tugging on his sleeve. Dad, can I show Miss Ross my volcano now? She's done talking about buildings. Did you ask her, or are you asking my permission to ask her? I'm asking permission first because you said to let her settle in, and I waited like 20 whole minutes, so she's definitely settled now. Luke looked at Evelyn, who'd noticed Jason's arrival and was watching with an expression somewhere between apprehension and curiosity. He caught her eye and raised an eyebrow in question. She smiled, a small, genuine smile, and nodded. Go ahead, Jay. But remember, she might not be as excited about volcanoes as you are. Jason grabbed Evelyn's hand with the unselfconscious confidence of a child who hadn't yet learned to doubt his welcome. Come on, I'll show you the science fair version, and then the one I made at home that's even better because I used real baking soda ratios. Evelyn let herself be towed toward the porch where Jason's volcano sat in state, and Luke watched as his son launched into an enthusiastic explanation involving tectonic plates and magma chambers. To her credit, Evelyn listened with what appeared to be genuine attention, asking questions that made Jason's face light up with the joy of having an interested adult audience. Your kid's going to be a geologist, Angela observed, appearing at Luke's other side. Or possibly a mad scientist. The jury's still out. As long as he's happy and not actually dangerous, I'll take it. Luke accepted the hamburger she handed him. What do you think? About her? Angela watched Evelyn crouch down to Jason's level to examine the volcano's paint job. I think she's trying really hard, which is sweet. I also think you're in more trouble than you're admitting. Why do you say that? Because you haven't taken your eyes off her since she got here, and the way you look at her is not the way you look at a business associate doing you a favor. Angela's voice was gentle but firm. Luke, honey, I know you. You're careful with your feelings, especially where Jason's concerned. But whatever this situation is, it's affecting you more than you want to admit. Luke started to deny it, then stopped. Angela had known him too long to be fooled by deflection. It's complicated. Life usually is. Just promise me you're being careful, with your heart and with his. She nodded toward Jason, who was now demonstrating the eruption mechanism while Evelyn watched with a mixture of fascination and concern about the potential mess. I promise, Luke said, meaning it. The afternoon unfolded with the easy rhythm of gathering among friends. People ate too much, told stories, argued good-naturedly about sports and politics, watched Jason and Kevin's daughter perform increasingly elaborate volcanic demonstrations. Evelyn gradually relaxed, though Luke noticed she gravitated toward the edges of groups rather than the centers, more comfortable observing than participating. He found her at one point standing alone near the fence, watching the interactions with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You okay?" he asked, joining her. "Yeah, just processing." She glanced at him. "You have something really special here. All these people who genuinely like each other, who show up for each other. It's not what I'm used to." "What are you used to?" "Networking events disguised as social gatherings. Conversations where everyone's calculating advantage. Relationships built on mutual benefit rather than actual affection." She paused. "It's lonely, actually. I just didn't realize how lonely until I saw the alternative." Luke studied her profile, seeing vulnerability she rarely showed. "You could have this, if you wanted it. These aren't special people. They're just normal people who decided to be kind." "I wouldn't know where to start." Her voice was so quiet, he almost didn't hear it. "You already did. You showed up. That's the hard part." She turned to face him fully, and there was something in her eyes that made his breath catch. "Luke, about the dinner the other night." "Dad!" Jason's shout interrupted whatever she'd been about to say. "Mr. Marcus says we can do the final eruption now, but we need you to supervise in case it gets messy." Luke held Evelyn's gaze for another moment, questions hanging between them, then nodded. "Duty calls. Volcanic supervision is apparently part of my job description." The final eruption was indeed messy, involving significantly more baking soda and vinegar than was strictly necessary. Jason and Kevin's daughter narrated the event like sports commentators while the adults formed a respectful perimeter and placed bets on how far the foam would spray. Evelyn ended up with red foam on her expensive jeans. Instead of being upset, she laughed, a real laugh that transformed her entire face, and helped Jason clean up the aftermath while discussing the chemical reaction that caused the eruption. As the sun started to set and people began packing up, Angela pulled Luke aside while Marcus helped Jason collect dishes. "I like her," she said simply. "I wasn't sure I would, but I do. She's trying really hard to connect, and that matters. She's not used to this kind of thing. I noticed, but she's also not condescending about it, which she could be. Instead, she's curious. That's a good quality." Angela paused. "Luke, I'm going to say something, and I need you to really hear me. You've been alone for 6 years. You've been an amazing father, and you've built a good life, but you've also been alone. If there's a chance for something real here—" "It's not real," Luke interrupted. "This whole thing started as a business arrangement." "I know, Marcus told me, but arrangements can turn into something else if both people are willing." She squeezed his arm. "Just don't close the door because you're scared, okay? Sarah would want you to be happy." The mention of his late wife hit harder than expected. Luke swallowed against the sudden tightness in his throat. "I know what she'd want. I also know I can't risk Jason's stability on something uncertain." "Life is uncertain, honey. That's not a reason to avoid living it." After everyone else had left, Evelyn helped Luke clean up, insisting despite his protests that she didn't need to. They worked in comfortable silence, collecting trash and folding tables while Jason played in the yard with the last of the daylight. "Your friends are wonderful," Evelyn said as they carried the final load of dishes inside. "Angela hugged me 3 times. I can't remember the last time someone hugged me who wasn't related to me." "Angela hugs everyone. It's her superpower." Luke set the dishes in the sink. "But yeah, they're good people. Jason's lucky to have grown up around them." She leaned against the counter, looking more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. "He's a great kid, Luke. Enthusiastic, curious, kind. You've done an incredible job raising him." "I've done my best. Some days that feels like enough, and some days it doesn't." He turned to face her. What were you going to say earlier? Before the volcanic interruption? Evelyn's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. I was going to thank you. Again. For the dinner, for today, for not making this whole situation more difficult than it already is. That wasn't what she'd been about to say. Luke was certain. But he didn't push. You held up your end. The contract extension showing up today, even though it was uncomfortable, we're even. Are we? She met his eyes directly. Because it doesn't feel even. It feels like you've given me more than I gave you. Like what? Perspective, honesty, a glimpse of what normal human connection looks like when it's not transactional. She hesitated, then continued. My father called this morning. He's accelerating the board vote. It's happening next Friday instead of next month. Luke's stomach dropped. That's fast. He's confident he has the votes. 3 of the 7 board members are longtime loyalists. He needs 4 to win. He thinks he can flip Margaret or one of the others by painting me as unstable and impulsive. Her voice was steady, but Luke could see the tension in her shoulders. The dinner helped, but it's not enough. He's digging for ammunition, and eventually he'll find something he can use. What kind of ammunition? Anything that makes me look reckless. Failed relationships, questionable business decisions, personal scandals. She laughed bitterly. The irony is that I've been so careful for so long that there's almost nothing to find, but that won't stop him from creating something out of nothing. Luke thought about Gerald Ross's cold assessment at dinner, the way he'd weaponized every piece of information. What do you need? I don't know. More time, maybe. A way to prove that my approach works before he convinces everyone it's doomed to fail. She rubbed her temples. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be dumping this on you. Our arrangement was for one dinner, and I'm violating the boundaries we set. You're not violating anything. You're talking to someone who gets what it's like to have everything riding on decisions you can't fully control. Luke moved closer, close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes. When Sarah died, I had about 30 seconds to figure out how to keep our lives from completely falling apart. I didn't have time to grieve or process or ask for help. I just had to make decisions and hope they were good enough. That feeling of being one mistake away from catastrophe? I know it. Intimately. Evelyn's eyes glistened suddenly. How did you get through it? One day at a time. Sometimes 1 hour at a time. He paused, considering whether to share what he rarely admitted. And by accepting that I couldn't do it alone, even though I wanted to, Mrs. Chen, Marcus, and Angela, other people in the community, they held me up when I couldn't stand by myself. I hated needing that help. But I needed it. I don't have people like that, Evelyn said quietly. Everyone in my life is connected to the business somehow. Everyone has an agenda. Not everyone. Luke gestured toward the backyard where Jason was chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. You spent 3 hours today with people who have no agenda except maybe getting you to eat too much potato salad. That's a start. She smiled despite herself. Angela did keep refilling my plate. That's how she shows love. You'll get used to it if... He stopped, realizing what he'd been about to say. If what? Evelyn's voice was soft. If you stick around. Luke met her eyes. Which you probably won't, because once this board situation resolves, you won't need to keep up any pretense of connection to my world. The silence that followed was heavy with things neither of them seemed ready to say. Outside, Jason called for his father to come see the fireflies before they disappeared. I should go, Evelyn said finally. It's getting late, and you have bedtime routines. Yeah. Luke didn't move. Evelyn, whatever happens with the board, you're tougher than your father thinks. Don't forget that. I'll try. She headed toward the door, then paused on the threshold. Luke, would it be okay if I came back sometime? Not for business or arrangements, just to be around people who are kind for no reason? The question caught him off guard with its vulnerability. Yeah, of course. You're welcome any time. After she left, Luke stood in his kitchen and tried to understand what was happening. This was supposed to be simple, a transaction, a favor exchanged for security. But somewhere between the Harbor Club's formal dinner and Jason showing Evelyn his volcano, it had become something else, something that felt dangerously close to real. He thought about Angela's words, about Sarah, about the life he'd built from grief and determination. For 6 years, he'd kept himself carefully contained, his world limited to what he could control and protect. It had been safe, stable. But maybe Angela was right. Maybe safety wasn't the same as living. Jason burst through the door, breathless and grass-stained. "Dad, I caught 3 fireflies." "Well, I almost caught them. They're really fast. Did Ms. Ross leave?" "Yeah, buddy. She had to get home. She was nice. She knew about volcanic rock formation and everything." Jason headed toward the bathroom to wash up. "Are we going to see her again?" Luke leaned against the counter, listening to his son's chatter echo through the house, and wondered how to answer that question when he didn't know himself. "Maybe," he called back. "We'll see what happens." What happened was that Monday morning brought another text from Evelyn. "My father hired a private investigator. He's looking into your background, our relationship timeline, everything. I wanted you to know in case anyone contacts you." Luke stared at the message, feeling the first real stirring of anger since this whole situation began. Gerald Ross wasn't just fighting his daughter for control of a company. He was willing to invade the privacy of anyone connected to her, to weaponize information about people who had nothing to do with his corporate power struggle. He typed back, "Let him look. There's nothing to find except a single father who works hard and takes care of his kid. If that's scandalous in his world, he's more out of touch than I thought." The response came quickly. "I'm sorry, I never wanted you exposed to this level of scrutiny. Too late for apologies. We're in it now." Luke paused, then added, "When's the board meeting?" "Friday at 2 p.m. "Why?" "Because I'm going to be there." A longer pause this time before her reply. "Luke, you don't have to do that. This isn't your fight." He thought about Jason, about the community that had held him up when he was drowning, about what it meant to stand beside someone even when it was hard. He thought about Evelyn's face when she'd admitted she didn't know how to have relationships that weren't transactional. "Maybe not. But I'm showing up anyway. Send me the details." The private investigator showed up at Luke's workshop on Wednesday morning, a thin man in an ill-fitting suit who introduced himself as David Chen and claimed to be conducting routine background checks for contract renewals. Luke saw through the lie immediately. Real contract verification came through official channels, not surprise visits from nervous men with clipboards. "I'm going to save us both some time," Luke said, not bothering to put down the angle grinder he'd been using. "You're working for Gerald Ross. You're looking for dirt on me or Evelyn, and you're not going to find anything because there's nothing to find. I'm a single father who runs a fabrication shop. My life is work, parenting, and occasionally having friends over for barbecues. That's it." Chen's professional mask slipped slightly. "Mr. Harper, I'm just trying to verify the timeline of my relationship with Evelyn Ross, how we met, whether it's real." Luke set down the grinder and pulled off his safety glasses. "Here's what I'll tell you, and you can report it verbatim to whoever's paying your fee. Evelyn Ross is one of the most competent, principled people I've ever worked with. She treats contractors with respect, pays on time, and actually cares about the quality of the work instead of just the bottom line. If her father thinks he can undermine her by digging into my background, he's wasting his money and your time." "So you confirm you're in a relationship with Ms. Ross?" Luke met the investigator's eyes steadily. "I confirm that my personal life is none of Gerald Ross's business, and neither is hers. Now, unless you have official documentation requiring my cooperation, I have work to do." Chen left 15 minutes later with nothing more than he'd arrived with. Luke watched him drive away, then immediately called Evelyn. "Your father's investigator just left my shop," he said when she answered, "asking questions about our relationship timeline and trying to verify details." "What did you tell him?" Her voice was tense. "That my personal life is none of his business. I didn't confirm or deny anything specific." Luke paused. "Evelyn, he's going to keep pushing. What's his endgame here? What's he actually looking for?" "Proof that I'm lying about being married. Or proof that even if I am married, it's too recent to indicate real stability. Or proof that you're somehow inappropriate or problematic." She sighed heavily. "He needs to paint me as either a liar or someone with poor judgment. Either narrative works for his purposes." "What if we gave him neither?" Luke found himself saying. "What if instead of defending against his attacks, we went on offense?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, show up to that board meeting with documentation he can't dispute. 3 years of professional correspondence, photos from job sites, testimonials from other contractors about our working relationship. Make it clear that whatever our personal relationship is now, it's built on a foundation of professional respect that predates any recent developments. That might help with the board, Evelyn said slowly, but it doesn't solve the fundamental problem. My father has convinced half the board that my new approach is too risky, that the company needs his steady hand to stay profitable. All the evidence of our relationship stability in the world won't change their minds about business strategy. Then maybe you need to change the conversation entirely. Luke leaned against his workbench, thinking. Stop defending your decisions and start showing results. You said 3 of your projects secured additional investment and 2 got city commendations. Have you actually shown the board what that means in concrete terms? Not projections, actual money, actual partnerships, actual proof that your approach works? The silence on the other end suggested he'd hit something important. I've mentioned it in reports, Evelyn said finally. But I've been so focused on defending myself against his attacks that I haven't really made the positive case for what I'm building. So make it now, before Friday. Send every board member a comprehensive breakdown of what you've accomplished, what's in the pipeline, what the long-term value proposition actually looks like. Make them choose between your father's fear-based narrative and your evidence-based results. Luke Harper, you've been giving business strategy advice for about 30 seconds, and you're already better at it than half the consultants I've hired. He could hear the smile in her voice despite the stress. How did a fabricator get so good at reading corporate politics? I'm not good at corporate politics. I'm good at reading people and understanding what actually matters versus what's just noise. He paused. Also, I've spent 6 years fighting people who assumed I couldn't handle being both a parent and a professional. I learned to stop defending myself and start proving them wrong. I wish I'd learned that earlier. Her voice softened. Thank you. For the advice, for dealing with the investigator, for showing up when you absolutely don't have to. Yeah, well, turns out I have a hard time watching bullies win. Luke glanced at the clock on his workshop wall. I need to pick up Jason from school in an hour, but if you want help putting together that documentation package, I can come by your office tonight after he's asleep. Mrs. Chen owes me about 17 favors. You do that? I just told a private investigator that you're one of the most principled people I've ever worked with. Might as well back that up with actions. That night, Luke found himself in Evelyn's downtown office for the first time. A sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and enough modern art to make him vaguely uncomfortable. Evelyn herself looked exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy bun and reading glasses perched on her nose as she sorted through files spread across a conference table. Coffee? She offered when he arrived. I have a machine that makes about 17 different varieties, none of which I understand. Black coffee is fine, fancy or not. Luke set down his laptop bag and surveyed the chaos on the table. This is all the documentation for your projects? 5 years of work compressed into what I'm hoping becomes a compelling narrative instead of just an overwhelming pile of paper. She handed him a mug of coffee that was, in fact, excellent, despite her claims of not understanding the machine. I started pulling files after our call: financial reports, partnership agreements, city correspondence, contractor testimonials. I just don't know how to organize it into something that tells the story effectively. Luke pulled up a chair and started sorting through documents. Tell me about the Riverside project, the one Rachel mentioned at the barbecue. Evelyn's whole demeanor shifted as she launched into an explanation of the development, a mixed-use space that combined affordable housing, commercial retail, and public green space along a previously industrial waterfront. She talked about the challenges of securing financing, the resistance from investors who wanted purely commercial development, the creative partnerships with nonprofit housing organizations and local businesses. The profit margin is lower than a traditional luxury condo development, she admitted, but the community impact is substantial, and the long-term property values in the surrounding area have already increased by 18%. Plus, the city gave us preferential consideration for 2 additional waterfront parcels because of how well the first project integrated public benefit. That's what you lead with, Luke said. Not the lower profit margin, the 18% increase in surrounding property values, and the preferential consideration for future parcels. You're not sacrificing profit for idealism. You're building sustainable value that creates more opportunities. They worked for 3 hours, organizing documentation into a narrative that highlighted not just Evelyn's vision, but the concrete results it had produced. Luke found himself caught up in the details, asking questions that forced her to articulate not just what she'd done, but why it mattered. "You're good at this," Evelyn said around 11 p.m., stretching her back after assembling the final section of the presentation. "Cutting through jargon and finding the core story. Do you do this in your business proposals?" "I do this when I'm trying to convince clients that investing in quality work upfront saves money long term." Luke saved the document they'd been collaborating on. "Most people want the cheapest option until you show them what cheap actually costs over time. Then they're willing to pay for value. That's exactly what I'm trying to convince the board of." She moved to stand beside him, looking at the screen. "My father built the company on high-volume, quick turnaround projects. Maximum profit extraction, minimum long-term investment. It worked in a different era, but the market has changed. Cities are demanding more community benefit. Investors are looking at ESG metrics. Employees want to work for companies with actual values. I'm not being idealistic. I'm being realistic about what's required to stay competitive." "Then say that. Stop letting him frame this as young idealism versus experienced pragmatism. This is about understanding market evolution versus clinging to an outdated model." Luke stood, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "Your father's approach isn't stable. It's stagnant. There's a difference." Evelyn met his eyes, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with business strategy. "How did you get so good at seeing through people's bullshit? And I include my own bullshit in that question." 6 years of single parenting teaches you to identify what's real versus what's performance. Kids don't have the patience for anything else. He stepped back slightly, needing distance. "It's late. I should get home before Mrs. Chen files adoption papers on Jason." "Luke, wait!" Evelyn caught his arm as he reached for his laptop bag. "I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." The seriousness in her voice made him pause. "Okay. When I showed up at your workshop 2 weeks ago, I was desperate. I needed a solution to an immediate problem, and you were the most convenient option that didn't involve anyone who could use it against me later. That's the truth, and I'm not proud of it." She took a breath. "But somewhere between that dinner and the barbecue and tonight, this stopped being about convenience. You've shown me more genuine kindness in 2 weeks than most people in my life have shown in years. You've challenged me to be better, to think differently, to remember that business success means nothing if you lose yourself achieving it." Luke's throat tightened. "Evelyn, I know our arrangement was temporary. I know you have every reason to walk away after Friday's board meeting and never think about corporate politics or complicated CEOs again. But I need you to know that this has mattered. You've mattered. And whatever happens with my father and the board, I'm grateful you took a chance on helping someone you barely knew." The vulnerability in her words cut straight through every defense Luke had built. He thought about Angela's warning, about the dangers of getting invested in something uncertain. He thought about Jason, about protecting the stable life they'd built. He thought about all the very good reasons to maintain professional distance and let this end cleanly. "You're not the only one whose perspective has shifted," he heard himself say. "I agreed to this thinking it was a simple transaction. Security for my business in exchange for 3 hours of performance. But you're not what I expected. You're not some corporate executive using people as tools. You're someone who's been fighting so hard for so long that you forgot what it feels like to have someone in your corner who doesn't want something from you." "Oh, Luke, let me finish." He turned to face her fully. "I don't know what this is between us. I don't know if it's real or if it's just two people who've been alone too long recognizing something in each other. But I know that when I told that investigator you were one of the most principled people I've ever worked with, I meant it. And I know that I want to see you win on Friday, not because of what it means for my contracts, but because you deserve to succeed on your own terms." Evelyn's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "What if I lose? What if my father convinces the board that he's right and I'm a liability?" "Then you lose this battle and figure out the next one. That's what you do when you're responsible for something bigger than yourself. You keep fighting even when it's hard." Luke reached out and took her hand, the gesture feeling both natural and momentous. "But I don't think you're going to lose. I think you're going to walk into that boardroom with evidence they can't ignore and make them choose between fear and progress. And I think enough of them are smart enough to choose progress. She squeezed his hand, her grip tight. Will you really be there? At the meeting? I'll be there. He squeezed back. Moral support, if nothing else. Someone in your corner who doesn't have an agenda beyond wanting you to succeed. I've never had that before. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Someone who just believes in me without needing something in return. Then it's about time you did. They stood in her office, hands linked, the city lights spread out below them like promises neither of them was quite ready to make. Luke knew he should leave, should maintain the boundaries that kept his life safe and predictable, but he also knew that some moments mattered more than safety. I should go, he said finally, not moving. I know. Evelyn didn't release his hand. Jason will be wondering where I am. Tell him you were helping a friend. She smiled slightly. Is that what we are? Friends? Luke thought about the question, about all the ways it was inadequate to describe what had developed between them. I think we're people who showed up for each other when it mattered. That's more than friends. I'm just not sure what to call it. How about we figure that out after Friday? Evelyn suggested. After the crisis is resolved and we're both thinking clearly? Sounds like a plan. He left 20 minutes later, after helping her organize the final presentation boards and promising to review the speech she planned to give. The drive home took him through quiet streets, past darkened businesses and the occasional late-night diner, and he found himself thinking about trajectories and choices. For 6 years, his trajectory had been clear: protect Jason, build the business, maintain stability at all costs. It had been enough because he'd made it enough, because the alternative was acknowledging the loneliness that Angela had gently called out. But Evelyn Ross had walked into his workshop desperate and honest, and in helping her, he'd somehow helped himself remember what it felt like to connect with another adult on terms that weren't purely transactional. To be seen as more than just Jason's father or a reliable contractor, to matter to someone in ways that had nothing to do with what he could provide. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Mrs. Chen was dozing on his couch when he arrived home, a mystery novel open on her lap. She woke as he entered, blinking sleepily behind her glasses. Jason's been asleep since 8:30, she reported. Did his homework, ate dinner, showed me a documentary about Pompeii that was somewhat traumatic. How was your evening? Productive. Luke helped her gather her things. Thank you for watching him on such short notice. Luke, dear, I've been watching that boy since he was in diapers. It's never short notice. It's just what we do for family. She patted his arm with her usual warmth. Though I notice you've been needing evening help more frequently lately. This wouldn't have anything to do with a certain CEO, would it? Luke should have known better than to try hiding anything from Mrs. Chen. It's complicated. The best things usually are. She headed toward the door, then paused. Sarah would have liked her, I think. Evelyn. She's got that same stubborn determination Sarah had, the kind that makes you want to be better than you thought you could be. The observation hit Luke squarely in the chest. He'd been so careful not to think about Sarah in the context of Evelyn, not to compare them or measure his current situation against his past. But Mrs. Chen was right. There was something in Evelyn's fierce commitment to doing things right, to fighting for what mattered despite the cost, that echoed qualities he'd loved in his late wife. I miss her, he said quietly. Sarah, I miss having someone who believed I could handle hard things. She'd be proud of the father you've become, the man you've become. Mrs. Chen squeezed his hand. And she'd tell you that you're allowed to be happy again, Luke, that loving someone new doesn't diminish what you had with her. After she left, Luke checked on Jason, finding him sprawled across his bed in the boneless way of sleeping children, then stood in his own bedroom staring at the photo on his dresser. Sarah smiled out at him, forever 28, forever holding their newborn son, forever frozen in a happiness that had ended too soon. I don't know what I'm doing, he told the photograph, feeling both foolish and necessary. I'm trying to help someone, and somewhere along the way it became more than that. I think you'd like her. I think you'd tell me to stop overthinking and just be honest about what I want. The photo offered no answers, but then it never had. Whatever Luke decided about Evelyn, about the future, about risking the careful stability he'd built, those decisions were his alone. Friday arrived with the weight of inevitability. Luke arranged for Jason to spend the afternoon and evening with Marcus and Angela, deflecting his son's curious questions about why Dad needed another business meeting with the tall CEO lady. "Is she going to hire you for a really big project?" Jason asked over breakfast, pouring too much syrup on his pancakes. "Maybe. We'll see what happens." Luke passed him a napkin. "But whatever happens with work, you know that's not the most important thing, right?" "I know. Family is the most important thing." Jason recited it with the confidence of someone who'd heard it his whole life. "But work is important too because it lets you buy me science kits." "Solid priorities, kid." Luke smiled despite his nerves. "Marcus is picking you up after school. Be good for Angela, don't conduct any volcanic experiments in their living room, and I'll see you tonight." The Ross Development Group headquarters occupied a modern building downtown, all glass and steel, and the kind of deliberate architecture that announced corporate success. Luke arrived at 1:30, wearing the same suit Evelyn had provided for the Harbor Club dinner, and feeling no less out of place. Evelyn met him in the lobby, looking every inch the CEO in a charcoal suit and heels, her hair pulled back severely and her expression professionally neutral. But when she saw him, her eyes warmed with genuine relief. "You came." She said it like she'd half expected him not to. "I said I would." Luke gestured at his suit. "Though I'm still not convinced I belong in boardrooms." "You belong anywhere you choose to be. That's what I'm learning from you." She glanced at her watch. "The meeting starts in 20 minutes. I've already distributed the documentation we prepared, sent it to all board members yesterday afternoon. Some of them actually responded positively, which is more than I expected." "And your father?" Radio silence, which probably means he's planning something. She took a breath. "Luke, I need to warn you. He might try to use you against me. Claim our relationship is fake, question your credibility, insinuate that you're somehow inappropriate. If it gets uncomfortable, I can handle uncomfortable." Luke held her gaze. "The question is, can you handle me being there when he attacks? Because I'm not going to sit silently if he crosses lines." Something fierce flashed across her face. "I wouldn't ask you to." The boardroom was exactly what Luke had imagined. A long table surrounded by leather chairs, windows overlooking the city, abstract art that probably cost more than his truck. Gerald Ross sat at the head of the table, flanked by two other board members Luke recognized from the Harbor Club dinner. The remaining 4 board members were scattered around the table, including Margaret, the woman who'd asked reasonable questions about balancing priorities. Evelyn took her seat at the opposite end of the table from her father, and after a brief hesitation, Luke sat in one of the chairs along the wall, present but not at the table, observer rather than participant. Gerald's eyes tracked the movement with barely concealed disdain. "Ms. Ross, I wasn't aware we were inviting guests to board meetings." "Mr. Harper isn't a guest. He's a key contractor with relevant perspective on our operational approach." Evelyn's voice was crisp and professional. "Unless you have a specific objection to his presence?" "I have many objections, but we can address those later." Gerald opened a folder in front of him. "Let's begin with the agenda item we're all here to discuss, the future leadership of this company." What followed was 2 hours of the most carefully controlled warfare Luke had ever witnessed. Gerald presented his case with practiced precision, declining profit margins, concerning project timelines, lack of board oversight on key decisions. He had charts and graphs and financial projections, all designed to paint Evelyn's leadership as risky at best and reckless at worst. Evelyn countered with the documentation they'd prepared, walking the board through each project's actual performance versus Gerald's cherry-picked metrics. She showed partnership agreements worth millions, city commendations that opened doors to future contracts, and long-term property value increases that exceeded traditional development models. "My father is correct that our profit margins have declined in some areas," she acknowledged, "but he's ignoring that we've simultaneously increased our project portfolio by 40% and secured preferential treatment for 8 new development opportunities. We're not losing ground. We're building capacity for sustainable growth." "Sustainable is just another word for slow," Gerald interjected. "This company was built on aggressive growth and maximum profit. Your approach is trying to be everything to everyone, and that's a recipe for mediocrity." "My approach is trying to build something that lasts beyond the next quarterly report." Evelyn's voice hardened. The market has changed, Dad. Investors care about ESG performance. Cities are demanding community benefit. Employees want meaningful work. We can either adapt to those realities or watch our competitors capture market share while we cling to outdated models. Margaret raised her hand, cutting through the rising tension. Evelyn, I've reviewed the documentation you sent. The results are impressive, I'll grant you that. But I share some concern about whether this approach is scalable. These community-focused projects require significant upfront investment and longer timelines. Can we sustain that across our entire portfolio? It was a fair question, delivered without Gerald's hostility. Evelyn leaned forward, her expression earnest. Not across the entire portfolio, no, but we don't need to. The model I'm proposing maintains our traditional high-profit, quick turnaround projects. They fund the operational stability we need. But we selectively invest 30 to 40% of our capacity in these longer-term, higher-impact developments. That balance gives us both stability and growth. A balance your father never needed, one of Gerald's allies pointed out. Because my father built this company in a different era with different market conditions. Evelyn's voice remained steady. I'm not criticizing his approach. It was right for its time. But times change. Either we change with them, or we become irrelevant. Gerald slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make several board members jump. I will not sit here and be lectured by my own daughter about market conditions I've navigated for 40 years. This company doesn't need innovation. It needs experienced leadership that understands how business actually works. And I understand that you built something remarkable, Evelyn shot back, her professional mask finally cracking to show real emotion. But I also understand that your version of leadership means controlling every decision, dismissing every idea that doesn't align with your vision, and treating anyone who challenges you as a threat rather than an asset. That's not leadership, Dad. That's dictatorship. The silence that followed was deafening. Luke watched Gerald's face cycle through surprise, fury, and something that might have been hurt before settling on cold rage. You've just proved my point, Gerald said quietly, his voice deadly calm. You're too emotional for this role, too personally invested to make rational business decisions. This outburst alone demonstrates that you're not ready for the responsibility you're claiming. That wasn't an outburst, Luke heard himself say, his voice cutting through the tension. That was honesty. Something I'm guessing doesn't happen in this boardroom very often. Every eye turned to him. Gerald's expression could have frozen steel. Mr. Harper, you're here as a courtesy. I suggest you remember that. I'm here because your daughter invited me to observe how this company makes decisions. Luke stood slowly, aware he was crossing a line but past caring. And what I'm observing is that you're threatened by her success. Every argument you've made today has been about control, not about what's actually best for the company. You have no standing to make that assessment. I have 3 years of working with both your company and your daughter. I've seen how she handles contractors, how she solves problems, how she treats people at every level of a project, and I've watched you try to undermine her at every turn, sending investigators to dig up dirt, framing legitimate business strategy as emotional instability, using her personal life as evidence of poor judgment. Luke moved closer to the table. You're not concerned about the company's future. You're concerned about losing control of something you built, and you're willing to destroy your daughter's credibility to maintain that control. Gerald rose from his chair, his face flushed with anger. How dare you come into my boardroom and make accusations about my motives? You're a fabricator, a contractor. You have no idea what's at stake here or what's required to run a billion-dollar company. You're right, I don't run a billion-dollar company. Luke's voice was calm, factual. I run a small fabrication shop that employs 3 people and supports my 6-year-old son. And in 6 years of doing that, I've learned one critical lesson. When you're responsible for something bigger than yourself, you make decisions based on what's actually needed, not what makes you comfortable. Your daughter is doing exactly that. The question is whether this board has the courage to support her. He turned to address the other board members directly. I know my opinion doesn't carry weight here, but I've built my business on being able to read people and assess competence. Evelyn Ross is one of the most capable professionals I've ever worked with. She's thorough, she's fair, and she's willing to adapt when circumstances change. Those qualities are exactly what you need in leadership. What you don't need is someone who can't separate their personal ego from business decisions. The silence stretched long enough that Luke wondered if he'd just made everything worse. Then Margaret spoke, her voice thoughtful. Mr. Harper makes an interesting point, albeit somewhat dramatically. She looked at Gerald, then at Evelyn. Gerald, I've known you for 20 years. I respect everything you've built. But I've also watched this tension between you and Evelyn escalate for months now, and I'm starting to wonder if Mr. Harper is right, that this is more about control than about the company's best interests. That's absurd, Gerald started, but Margaret raised her hand. Let me finish. Evelyn's approach is different from yours. That doesn't make it wrong. The documentation she provided shows real results, real partnerships, real value creation. Yes, the profit margins are different, but the overall portfolio performance is strong, and the long-term positioning looks solid. I'm not ready to call this a failure that requires your intervention. Another board member, a younger man Luke hadn't heard speak yet, nodded. I agree. The numbers don't support the narrative that Evelyn's leadership is putting the company at risk. Different doesn't mean dangerous. Luke watched Gerald realize he was losing control of the room, watched him calculate his next move. What came next made Luke's blood run cold. Since we're being honest about motives, Gerald said, his voice smooth and dangerous, perhaps we should address the elephant in the room. Mr. Harper's passionate defense of my daughter might be admirable if it weren't for one crucial fact. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. This is a report from the investigator I hired. It details exactly when and how Mr. Harper and Evelyn's so-called relationship began. Spoiler alert, it began 2 weeks ago, immediately before the Harbor Club dinner. This marriage she's been using to demonstrate stability? It's a sham, a business arrangement designed to manipulate this board. The folder landed on the polished table with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire boardroom. Luke felt his heart rate spike, felt every board member's attention shift from Gerald to him to Evelyn, felt the careful house of cards they'd built threatening to collapse. Evelyn's face had gone perfectly still, her professional mask locked in place, even as Luke could see the panic flickering in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but Luke cut her off. You're right, he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. The marriage is fake. We're not actually married. Never have been. He heard Evelyn's sharp intake of breath, saw Gerald's triumphant smile begin to spread, and continued before either could speak. But everything else I said is true. Evelyn Ross is one of the most competent, principled professionals I've ever worked with. Our professional relationship goes back 3 years, exactly as documented. And yes, 2 weeks ago, she came to me desperate and asked me to pretend to be her husband for one dinner because she was being backed into a corner by a father who can't accept that she's built something different from what he would have built. Luke met Gerald's eyes directly. So yeah, I agreed to help her, because I understood what it's like to be judged unfairly, to have people assume you're incompetent based on circumstances rather than performance, and because even after knowing her for just a few hours, I could see she was worth defending. The room was so quiet Luke could hear the ventilation system humming. You're admitting to fraud, Gerald said, his voice sharp with victory. You both lied to this board, manipulated us with a fake relationship designed to make Evelyn appear more stable than she actually is. That's grounds for immediate termination. Is it? Luke turned to address the full board. Because from where I'm standing, what I'm admitting to is helping someone navigate a personal attack disguised as business concern. Your investigator didn't find anything damaging about either of us because there's nothing to find. No scandal, no impropriety, no actual evidence that Evelyn's personal life has any bearing on her professional competence. So she asked someone she trusted professionally to help her deflect a deeply invasive line of attack. That's not fraud. That's self-defense. Margaret was watching Luke with an expression that might have been respect or might have been calculation. Mr. Harper, I appreciate your honesty, but you understand this puts us in a difficult position. We were told you were married to our CEO. That information influenced at least some of our perception of stability. Did it? Luke challenged. Because I remember that dinner at the Harbor Club. I remember Mr. Ross attacking his daughter's judgment, her personal life, her competence. I remember him using the fact that she was unmarried as evidence that she couldn't handle responsibility. So she responded by showing him she could have both a personal life and professional success. Was that manipulative? Maybe, but it was responding to manipulation with the only tool available. "This is absurd," Gerald interrupted, his voice rising. "You're trying to justify lying to a corporate board. There's no version of this where that's acceptable." "You're right," Evelyn said suddenly, her voice cutting through the argument with unexpected strength. She stood, facing her father directly across the long table. "There's no version where lying to the board is acceptable. So let me be completely honest now, with all of you, about exactly what happened and why." Luke started to protest to try to shield her from the consequences of his admission, but she held up a hand to stop him. 2 weeks ago, my father informed me he was planning this board meeting. He told me explicitly that he'd convinced several board members I was too unstable and uncommitted to run this company effectively. He cited my lack of a stable personal relationship as evidence. Never mind that he himself was divorced twice before finding his current wife. Never mind that my relationship status has nothing to do with my ability to analyze market trends or manage complex projects. But he made it clear that my being single and focused on work was somehow proof of poor judgment. Her voice was steady, factual, devastating in its precision. I panicked. I'd spent 3 years building this company into something I'm genuinely proud of, and I was about to lose it because my father couldn't accept that I don't run things his way. So yes, I went to Luke Harper, someone I'd worked with professionally for years, someone I knew to be trustworthy and competent, and I asked him to help me. I offered him financial incentives in the form of extended contracts. He agreed with conditions that included spending time in his world, so I couldn't just use him and disappear. We attended one dinner together. That's it. She turned to address the full board, her shoulders back, her chin up. Was it the right choice? Probably not. Did it solve the fundamental problem? Obviously not, since we're here right now and my father just exposed the whole thing. But I want you all to understand something. I didn't do this because I'm unstable or because I lack judgment. I did it because I was being attacked on grounds that had nothing to do with my actual performance, and I tried to defend myself the only way I could think of. By lying, Gerald said flatly. By refusing to let you use my personal life as a weapon against my professional competence, Evelyn countered. Which is exactly what you've been doing for months. Every board meeting, every report, every conversation, you find ways to suggest I'm not ready, not stable, not capable. And when I prove you wrong with actual results, you move the goalposts. First it was profit margins, then it was project timelines, then it was community partnerships. And when none of those worked, you went after my personal life. So yes, I made a choice I'm not proud of, but I made it in response to tactics I'm even less proud of. Margaret cleared her throat, her expression thoughtful. Evelyn, I appreciate your honesty, but this doesn't change the fact that you and Mr. Harper misrepresented your relationship to this board. That's a serious breach of trust. I understand that. Evelyn's voice was quieter now. And I take full responsibility for it. If the board wants to censure me or put additional oversight in place, I accept that consequence. But I'm asking you to separate this one mistake, made under pressure from a deeply inappropriate personal attack, from the actual question of whether my leadership is effective. How can we separate them? One of Gerald's allies spoke up. If you're willing to lie about something this significant, how do we trust anything else you've told us? Because everything else I've told you is documented and verifiable, Evelyn shot back. Financial reports audited by third parties, partnership agreements with external organizations, city commendations that are public record, project performance data that your own staff compiled. The only thing that wasn't verifiable was my relationship status, which shouldn't have been relevant in the first place. Luke watched the board members process this, saw them weighing Evelyn's admission against Gerald's accusations, saw the calculation in their eyes about what this meant for the company's future. I have a question, he heard himself say, drawing attention back to him. For the board, what exactly are you trying to decide here? Because it seems like you're conflating two completely separate issues. One is whether Evelyn Ross is competent to run this company. The other is whether she made a personal mistake under pressure. Those aren't the same question. Mr. Harper, with respect, you've admitted to being part of a scheme to deceive this board, Gerald said coldly. Your opinion on what questions we should be asking is irrelevant. Maybe, but I'm going to give it anyway. Luke moved closer to the table, addressing Margaret directly, since she seemed most likely to actually listen. I've spent 3 years working with this company under Evelyn's leadership. In that time, she's been fair, thorough, and consistently honest in every professional interaction I've had with her. She pays contractors on time, she doesn't try to cut corners or shift costs unfairly, and when there are problems, she addresses them directly instead of playing games. That's why I agreed to help her when she asked, because I knew from experience that she was someone worth defending. He paused, making sure he had everyone's attention. The fact that she made one desperate decision under extraordinary pressure doesn't change 3 years of demonstrated integrity. What it shows is that she's human, that when she's being attacked unfairly, she fights back even if the methods aren't perfect. Honestly, that makes me trust her more, not less, because I'd rather work with someone who fights imperfectly than someone who just accepts defeat when they're being treated unjustly. That's a lovely speech, Gerald said sarcastically, but it doesn't address the fundamental issue. My daughter has proved she's willing to manipulate this board when it serves her interests. That's disqualifying. Is it? Margaret's voice was thoughtful. Gerald, I'm going to be blunt. You've been trying to undermine Evelyn for months. We've all seen it. The constant criticism, the moving goalposts, the personal attacks disguised as business concerns. You sent a private investigator to dig into her relationship because you couldn't find legitimate business reasons to question her leadership. That's not concern for the company. That's a parent who can't let go of control. That's absurd, Gerald sputtered, but Margaret wasn't finished. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, Evelyn made a mistake while defending herself against tactics that never should have been used in the first place. You made this personal, Gerald. You attacked her stability, her judgment, her personal life. She responded in kind. I'm not saying what she did was right, but I understand why she did it. Are you seriously suggesting we overlook outright fraud because I was too critical of my daughter's performance? Gerald's voice was incredulous. I'm suggesting we consider context, Margaret said firmly. And I'm suggesting that if we're going to hold Evelyn accountable for her mistakes, we should also hold you accountable for creating the conditions that led to those mistakes. Another board member spoke up, a man in his 50s who'd been silent until now. I agree with Margaret. This entire situation is messy, but the fundamental question remains. Is Evelyn Ross capable of running this company effectively? The evidence suggests yes. Her projects perform, her partnerships deliver value, her strategic vision aligns with where the market is heading. The fake relationship was a mistake, but it doesn't negate 3 years of solid performance. You can't be serious, Gerald said, his composure finally cracking. She lied to all of you. She brought in an outside contractor to help her perpetuate that lie. She compromised the integrity of this board's decision-making process. And you're going to ignore that because her projects perform well? We're going to weigh it appropriately, Margaret corrected, which means considering it alongside everything else we know about her leadership. Gerald, you're asking us to fire your daughter over one mistake while ignoring the fact that you've been systematically undermining her for months. That's not objective business judgment. That's a family conflict being played out in a boardroom. Gerald's face had gone red. I built this company from nothing. I have every right to ensure it's run properly. You do, Margaret agreed. But you don't have the right to sabotage your daughter's leadership just because she does things differently than you would. That's the core issue here, and we all know it. The room fell silent as the board members exchanged glances, having a wordless conversation that Luke could only partially follow. He looked at Evelyn, saw her standing perfectly still with her hands clasped in front of her, and recognized the posture. It was the same way he'd stood in the hospital 6 years ago, waiting for doctors to tell him whether Sarah would survive. The stance of someone who knew their entire life might change in the next few minutes and had no control over the outcome. Finally, Margaret spoke. I move that we table the leadership discussion until our next quarterly meeting in 3 months. That gives us time to assess Evelyn's performance without the immediate pressure of this conflict, and it gives her time to demonstrate that today's admission was an aberration rather than a pattern. Second, another board member said immediately. All in favor? Margaret looked around the table. 4 hands went up. Gerald and his 2 allies sat motionless, their opposition clear. That left 1 board member who hadn't voted, a woman in her 40s who'd been taking notes throughout the entire meeting. Ms. Patterson? Margaret prompted gently. Patterson looked at Gerald, then at Evelyn, then directly at Luke with an expression that suggested she was weighing something carefully. "I want to hear from Mr. Harper one more time," she said. "Specifically, I want to know whether you think Evelyn Ross is capable of learning from this mistake, because that's what matters to me, not whether she made an error in judgment, but whether she has the capacity to grow from it." Luke considered the question carefully, aware that his answer might determine everything. He thought about the past 2 weeks, about Evelyn showing up at his workshop desperate and afraid, about her sitting in his backyard looking lost among people who connected easily, about her working until midnight to build a case based on evidence rather than fear. 3 weeks ago, Evelyn Ross came to my workshop and asked me to help her with something that made both of us uncomfortable. He said slowly. She could have lied about why she needed help, could have manipulated me into agreeing without being honest about what was at stake. Instead, she was completely transparent about the situation, about what she needed and why. That's the first data point. He moved closer to the table, speaking directly to Patterson. The second data point is what happened after that dinner. She could have ghosted me, could have taken what she needed and disappeared back into her corporate world. Instead, she showed up at a barbecue in my neighborhood, met my friends, sat on the ground with my 6-year-old son while he explained volcanic eruptions, and asked genuine questions about how normal people build relationships that aren't transactional. She was so far out of her comfort zone she was practically in a different state, but she showed up anyway because she'd made a commitment. And the third data point? Patterson asked. The third data point is right now. She could have let me take the fall for this, could have claimed I acted independently, or that she didn't fully understand what I was doing. Instead, she stood up and took full responsibility, even though she knew it might cost her everything. Luke met Evelyn's eyes across the room. Yeah, she made a mistake. But she made it while fighting against unfair tactics, and she's owning it completely instead of making excuses. That shows more character than most people demonstrate in their entire careers. Patterson nodded slowly, then raised her hand. I vote in favor of Margaret's motion. 3 months to assess performance without the immediate crisis. The tension in the room shifted palpably. 5 votes in favor, 3 opposed. The motion carried. Gerald stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is a mistake. You're letting personal sympathy cloud your business judgment, and you'll regret it when Evelyn's idealistic projects start failing and the profit margins disappear entirely. Maybe, Margaret said calmly. Or maybe we'll look back in 3 months and see that we made the right choice by supporting innovation over stagnation. Either way, that's what leadership requires, making decisions based on incomplete information and taking responsibility for the outcomes. Gerald gathered his materials with sharp, angry movements. I'll be watching very carefully, and if there's even a hint of another deception, another manipulation, I will call for an immediate vote of no confidence. Are we clear? Perfectly clear, Evelyn said quietly. Thank you all for your consideration. I won't let you down. The board members filed out slowly, several of them stopping to speak quietly with Evelyn or exchange glances with Gerald. Luke stayed against the wall, feeling suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline drained away. He'd just admitted to deception in front of a corporate board, defended someone he barely knew 3 weeks ago, and possibly destroyed any chance of future contracts with the company that provided 70% of his income. But Evelyn still had her company, for now, at least. That had to count for something. When the room had cleared except for the 2 of them, Evelyn turned to face him. Her professional mask had finally crumbled completely, revealing raw emotion beneath. You didn't have to do that, she said, her voice unsteady. Admit the truth. Defend me. Risk your reputation and your contracts. You could have stayed silent, let me handle it, protected yourself. Yeah, I could have. Luke moved toward her slowly. But I told you I'd be there. I don't go back on my word. You also told me you'd be moral support, not a key witness in my defense. She laughed shakily. Luke, you basically threw yourself on a grenade for me. Not really. I just told the truth and let the board decide what to do with it. He reached her side, close enough to see the unshed tears she was fighting. How are you holding up? I'm not entirely sure. Part of me wants to celebrate that I still have my job. Part of me is terrified about what the next 3 months will bring, and part of me is just... She trailed off, looking at him with an expression that made his chest tight. I don't know what to do with what you did in there. No one's ever defended me like that before. No one's ever risked something real to stand beside me when things got hard. Then you've been around the wrong people. Luke said it simply, as fact rather than criticism. Apparently, she took a shaky breath. Your contract's with us? Gerald meant what he said about watching carefully. If he finds even a hint of impropriety in how I award projects, he'll use it against me. Which means I probably can't give you any new work without it looking like favoritism or payback for what you did today. Luke had already considered this possibility. I figured as much. It's okay. I'll diversify, find other clients, make it work. That's not fair to you. You helped me and now you're being punished for it. I'm not being punished. I'm dealing with consequences of a choice I made freely. He touched her shoulder gently. Evelyn, I knew what I was getting into. Maybe not the specific details, but I understood that helping you might complicate my professional life. I did it anyway because it was the right thing to do. She covered his hand with hers, her fingers cold. I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Okay. Luke braced himself for whatever was coming. When this started, you were convenient, a solution to an immediate problem. But somewhere along the way, you became something else. You became someone who saw me, not the CEO, not the daughter of Gerald Ross, not the person I present to the world. You saw the person underneath all that performance. And you didn't flinch. You didn't judge. You just showed up and helped. Her voice was getting rougher, emotion bleeding through despite her efforts to control it. I don't know what that makes us. I don't know if what I'm feeling is real or if it's just gratitude mixed with crisis bonding. But I know that when I think about the next 3 months of proving myself to the board, the thing that makes it feel manageable is knowing you believe I can do it. And I need you to understand what that means to me, even if— Stop. Luke squeezed her shoulder gently. Before you finish that sentence, I need to say something too. She nodded, waiting. 3 weeks ago, I had a simple life. Predictable. Safe. I'd built it that way deliberately because I had a son to protect and couldn't afford chaos. Then you walked into my workshop desperate and honest, and I made a choice to help you. I told myself it was just business, just a transaction that would end cleanly. He paused, making sure he had the words right. But Angela was right when she said I was in more trouble than I wanted to admit. Because somewhere between that first dinner and watching you sit on the ground with Jason talking about volcanoes, this stopped being about convenience or contracts. It became about actually caring whether you succeeded. Actually wanting to see you win, not because of what it meant for me, but because you deserved it. Evelyn's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Luke, I'm not done. He moved his hand from her shoulder to cup her face gently. I don't know what this is either. I don't know if it's real or sustainable or if it'll survive once the crisis is over and we're both thinking clearly. But I know that I haven't felt this invested in another person's well-being in 6 years. And I know that scares the hell out of me because I swore I'd never risk Jason's stability on something uncertain. So what do we do? Her voice was barely above a whisper. We table it. Like the board tabled the leadership discussion. Luke managed a small smile. You need the next 3 months to prove yourself without any distractions or complications. I need that time to figure out how to diversify my business and whether what I'm feeling is real or just crisis bonding, like you said. We both need space to think clearly. That's very rational. Evelyn leaned into his touch slightly. I hate how rational that is. Me too, but it's the right call. He let his hand drop, stepping back to create physical distance that matched the emotional distance he was proposing. 3 months. You focus on the company, I focus on securing my business, and we both figure out who we actually are outside of this pressure cooker situation. And then? Then we reassess. See if what we're feeling survives normal life instead of crisis mode. Luke picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd left it. In the meantime, I meant what I said in there. You're capable of learning from this mistake. You're capable of leading that company exactly the way you envisioned. Don't let your father or the board or anyone else make you doubt that. Evelyn nodded, clearly fighting tears. Thank you for everything, for showing up when you didn't have to, for defending me even when it cost you, for being honest about what this is and isn't. That's what you do for people you care about. Luke headed toward the door, then paused. And Evelyn? When you're stressed about the board or your father or whether you're making the right calls, remember that you have people who believe in you. Angela, Marcus, Rachel, they liked you at that barbecue. They'd be your friends if you let them. You don't have to do this alone. After the door closed behind him, Luke made it to his truck before the shaking started. He sat in the parking garage, gripping the steering wheel, processing everything that had just happened. He'd admitted to fraud in front of a corporate board. He'd lost his primary source of income. He'd fallen for someone completely inappropriate at the worst possible time. And somehow, despite all of that, he didn't regret any of it. His phone buzzed. Marcus. "How did it go?" his friend asked without preamble. "Complicated. I'll explain later." Luke started the truck, suddenly desperate to get home to Jason. "Is Jay okay?" "He's fine. Built another volcano out of Angela's Tupperware and is currently explaining plate tectonics to our cat. You want us to keep him for dinner?" "No, I'll be there in 20 minutes. I need—" Luke paused, not sure how to finish that sentence. "You need your kid," Marcus supplied gently. "Yeah, I get it. We'll see you soon." The drive to Marcus and Angela's house took Luke through the city he'd lived in his entire adult life, past familiar landmarks and neighborhoods where he'd worked on various projects. Everything looked the same, but he felt fundamentally changed by the past few hours. He'd taken a stand for something beyond his own immediate interests. He'd risked security for principle. He'd admitted to caring about someone in a way that made him vulnerable, and he'd survived it. They both had. Jason launched himself at Luke the moment he walked through Marcus and Angela's door, chattering about volcanoes and Angela's cat, and whether they could get a cat who would tolerate volcanic demonstrations. Luke held his son close, breathing in the familiar smell of grape juice and kid shampoo, and felt the world stabilize slightly. "Did your meeting go good?" Jason asked, pulling back to look at Luke's face with the intensity of someone who'd learned young to read his father's moods. "It was challenging," Luke said honestly, "but it went as well as it could have. I'm proud of how it turned out." "Did the tall lady get what she needed?" "Yeah, buddy, I think she did." Angela appeared with Luke's jacket and a knowing look. "You look like you've been through a war. Come sit down. I'll make coffee." "I should get Jay home. It's late." "It's 6:30, Luke. Sit." Angela pointed to the couch with the authority of someone who wouldn't take no for an answer. "Jason's already eaten." "You haven't. Marcus is ordering pizza. You're going to sit, eat, and tell us what happened before you drive home." 20 minutes later, with Jason absorbed in a documentary about the Yellowstone supervolcano and pizza cooling on the coffee table, Luke gave Marcus and Angela the abbreviated version of the board meeting. He left out some of the emotional complexity, but included the essential facts: the admission of deception, the board's decision to table the leadership vote, the likelihood that he'd lost his Ross development contracts. "So you basically sacrificed your primary income stream to defend someone you've known for 3 weeks," Marcus summarized. "That's very noble and also possibly insane." "I'm aware." Luke took a bite of pizza that tasted like cardboard. "I'll figure it out. Diversify clients, take on smaller projects, maybe expand into residential work. It'll be tight for a while, but we'll make it work." "We'll help," Angela said immediately. "Marcus can refer some of his contacts. I can ask around at the school. There are always parents looking for fabrication work." "You're not doing this alone." The offer made Luke's throat tight. "Thank you, both of you, for everything." "That's what family does." Angela squeezed his hand. "Now tell me the real question. What happens with Evelyn?" "Nothing. For 3 months at least. We both need space to figure out if what we're feeling is real or just crisis bonding." "And you think 3 months of not seeing each other will help with that?" Angela's skepticism was evident. "I think it'll help us both think clearly instead of making decisions based on adrenaline and proximity." Luke set down his pizza. "Angela, I have a 6-year-old son who's been through enough disruption in his life. I can't bring someone into his world unless I'm absolutely certain it's real and sustainable. 3 months gives us both time to be sure. Or 3 months gives you both time to talk yourselves out of something that could actually be good," Marcus countered. "Sometimes thinking too much is worse than just feeling." "Maybe, but I'd rather err on the side of caution where Jason's concerned." The conversation moved to other topics after that. Marcus's latest difficult client, Angela's frustration with school administration, the logistics of Jason's upcoming science fair. Normal life, the kind that had nothing to do with corporate boards or hostile takeovers or fake relationships that felt increasingly real. By the time Luke and Jason made it home, Luke was exhausted in every possible way. He supervised Jason's bedtime routine on autopilot, answering questions about whether Earth would actually explode like Pompeii with enough reassurance to prevent volcanic nightmares. "Dad?" Jason asked as Luke tucked him in. "Are you sad about something?" "Why do you ask that?" "You have your sad face, the one you get sometimes when you think I'm not looking." Luke sat on the edge of Jason's bed, reminded once again that his son was far more perceptive than seemed reasonable for a 6-year-old. "I'm not sad exactly, just processing some changes at work. Nothing for you to worry about." "Is it about Ms. Ross? Because you look the same way you did after Mom died. Like you're trying to be brave, but you're actually really sad." The observation hit Luke like a physical blow. He'd worked so hard to shield Jason from his own grief, to be strong and stable and reliable. The fact that his son had noticed anyway, had carried that observation for 6 years, made his chest ache. "I'm okay, Jay. Really." Luke smoothed back his son's hair. "Sometimes adults have complicated feelings about things. It doesn't mean anything's wrong, it just means we're figuring stuff out." "Is Ms. Ross your friend now, like Mr. Marcus and Miss Angela?" "Yeah, I think she is. Or she could be if we both figure out how to make it work." "Good. I liked her. She knew about igneous rock and everything." Jason yawned hugely. "You should have more friends, Dad. You work too much and don't have enough people to talk to." "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just don't always notice because you're busy being a grown-up." Luke kissed his son's forehead, love and pride mixing with the grief of knowing Jason had grown up too fast, had learned too young to notice when the adults around him were struggling. "Sleep well, buddy. Big day tomorrow. Mrs. Chen's taking you to the Science Museum, remember?" After Jason's breathing had evened into sleep, Luke sat at his kitchen table with his laptop and started the painful process of assessing his business's financial reality. Without Ross development contracts, he'd need to replace roughly 70% of his revenue within 6 months. It was possible, but it would require aggressive networking, price cuts he couldn't really afford, and taking on smaller projects that didn't justify the time investment. His phone buzzed with a text. "Evelyn. Made it home. Board members are already emailing with questions about Q1 projections. Apparently tabling the vote didn't reduce scrutiny, it just redirected it. Thank you again for today." "I know that's inadequate, but I don't have better words." Luke stared at the message, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. 3 months of space meant 3 months of minimal contact, of letting whatever this was either develop roots or die naturally. It meant not being available for late-night text conversations or crisis management or any of the things that had built unexpected intimacy over the past few weeks. It was the right call. He knew it was the right call. He typed back, "You've got this. Trust your preparation and don't let them rattle you. I'll be around if you need anything, but you're fully capable of handling this on your own." The response came quickly. "I know. Still nice to have someone believe that. Good night, Luke." "Good night." He set down the phone and returned to his financial projections, but the numbers kept blurring as his mind wandered to other calculations. 3 months to figure out if what he felt was real. 3 months for Evelyn to prove herself without the distraction of whatever was developing between them. 3 months to protect Jason from uncertainty, while Luke figured out if he was ready to risk opening his carefully controlled life to something unpredictable. It was practical. It was rational. It was the responsible choice for everyone involved. So why did it feel like he was making a mistake? The first week without regular contact with Evelyn felt like adjusting to a missing tooth. Luke kept reaching for his phone, expecting messages that didn't come. Kept thinking of things to tell her before remembering they were maintaining distance. He threw himself into work instead, calling every potential client he'd networked with over the past 3 years, sending proposals for projects he normally would have passed on, accepting smaller jobs that barely covered costs but kept his employees busy. By the second week, he'd secured enough work to cover maybe 40% of his lost Ross development income. It wasn't enough, but it was progress. Jason noticed the increased stress, approaching Luke one evening while he was reviewing yet another proposal at the kitchen table. "Dad, you've been working a lot more lately. Are we okay?" Luke looked up from his laptop to find his son watching him with worried eyes. "We're fine, buddy. Just a slow period at work, so I'm hustling to line up new projects. It happens sometimes in business." "Is it because of Ms. Ross? Because you helped her and now her company doesn't give you work anymore?" The perceptiveness shouldn't have surprised Luke anymore, but it still caught him off guard. "Where did you hear that?" "I didn't hear it. I figured it out." Jason climbed onto the chair across from Luke. "You had lots of work from her company before. Then you went to that important meeting. Now you're worried about money and working extra hard. That's called consequences, right? Like when I break something and have consequences?" Luke closed his laptop, giving his son his full attention. "Yeah, kind of like that. Except I didn't break anything. I made a choice that had costs attached to it. Sometimes doing the right thing means accepting that things get harder for a while." "But it was still the right thing?" "Yeah, it was." Luke reached across the table to ruffle Jason's hair. "And we're going to be fine. We've gotten through harder things than this." "Like when Mom died and you had to figure out everything by yourself?" The casual mention of Sarah hit Luke in a way it usually didn't. Maybe because he'd been thinking about her more lately, wondering what she'd think of the choices he was making, whether she'd approve of him opening himself up to the possibility of caring for someone new. "Yeah, like that. We figured it out then, and we'll figure it out now. That's what we do." Jason nodded seriously, then brightened. "Mrs. Chen said I could help her bake cookies tomorrow if that's okay. She wants to teach me about chemical reactions in cooking. That's science, right? That's definitely science. And tell Mrs. Chen I said thank you for the millionth time for being the best neighbor in the history of neighbors." After Jason was in bed, Luke allowed himself to check Evelyn's company website for news. It felt like cheating on their agreement to maintain distance, but he justified it as professional interest. The site had been updated with a press release about a new affordable housing partnership that had secured city approval, one of the projects she'd mentioned during the board meeting. The comments section was full of praise from community organizations and urban planning advocates. She was succeeding, proving herself exactly the way she needed to. Luke closed the browser and tried not to think about how much he wanted to text her congratulations. Week 3 brought an unexpected visitor to Luke's workshop. Margaret Patterson, the board member whose deciding vote had saved Evelyn's position, appeared on a Tuesday afternoon with a proposition that made Luke's head spin. "I'm here in a personal capacity, not representing Ross Development," she said after introducing herself. "I run a property management company that occasionally needs custom fabrication work. Your reputation is excellent, and I'd like to discuss several projects that might interest you." Luke studied her carefully, looking for the catch. "With respect, Ms. Patterson, I appreciate the offer, but I need to know, is this connected to what happened at the board meeting? Because if you're trying to help me out of sympathy or guilt, I can't accept that." "It's neither sympathy nor guilt." Margaret smiled slightly. "It's pragmatism. I need quality work at fair prices. You provide that. The fact that you also demonstrated remarkable integrity under pressure makes me more confident in working with you, not less. I value people who do the right thing even when it costs them." The projects she outlined were substantial: custom railings for a historic building renovation, decorative metalwork for a boutique hotel lobby, structural supports for a rooftop garden installation. Combined, they represented nearly 30% of Luke's lost income. "I'll need detailed proposals by next week," Margaret said. "But assuming your bids are competitive, I'm inclined to award all 3 projects. Fair warning, though, I'm demanding about quality and timelines. I expect excellence." "That's all I know how to deliver," Luke said honestly. After she left, he sat in his workshop office and let himself feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this would actually work out. Maybe he could build something more sustainable than depending primarily on one client, no matter how reliable that client had been. His phone rang. Marcus. "Angela's on a warpath," his friend said without preamble. "She just found out that Evelyn Ross called her yesterday, asking about volunteering opportunities at Jason's school. Angela's convinced you two are secretly dating and didn't tell us, and she's threatening to show up at your workshop demanding answers. I'm giving you a 5-minute head start to prepare." Luke's heart skipped. Evelyn called Angela about what? About ways she could volunteer at the elementary school. Specifically mentioned wanting to help with the science fair since Jason was so enthusiastic about volcanoes. Angela's thrilled someone with resources wants to support the program, but she's also extremely suspicious about the motivation. So, want to give me the real story before my wife goes full investigation mode? Luke scrubbed a hand over his face. We agreed to take 3 months apart. No contact, no complications, just space to figure out if what we felt was real or crisis bonding. I haven't talked to her since the board meeting. But she's calling your friends about volunteering at your son's school. Marcus's voice carried equal parts amusement and concern. That's not exactly maintaining distance, man. No, it's not. Luke felt something warm and complicated settle in his chest. I need to think about this. Can you stall Angela for a few hours? I can try, but you know my wife. When she decides something needs addressing, it gets addressed. Luke hung up and sat motionless in his workshop, processing this new information. Evelyn was reaching out to his community, trying to build connections even while they weren't talking. It wasn't maintaining professional distance. It was the opposite of that. It was also exactly the kind of thing someone did when they were trying to become part of someone's life rather than just passing through it. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He opened it to find a message clearly meant for someone else, then a quick correction. Sorry, wrong number. ER. Then immediately. Actually, that's a lie. I meant to text you, but chickened out and pretended it was an accident. This is Evelyn. I know we're supposed to be maintaining distance, but I wanted you to know I called Angela about the science fair, because I can't stop thinking about Jason talking about volcanoes, and I thought maybe I could help in a way that doesn't involve you and me directly, but still lets me be connected to your world somehow. That probably sounds creepy. I'm going to stop texting now before I make this worse. Luke read the message 3 times, feeling his carefully maintained distance crumbling. He typed back, "Doesn't sound creepy. It sounds like someone trying to build relationships instead of transactions. Angela will love having your help, and Jay will be over the moon if someone who actually understands igneous rock formation judges his project." The response came quickly. "You don't think I'm overstepping? Inserting myself into your life when we agreed to space? I think you're doing exactly what I asked you to do at the barbecue, letting people in instead of keeping everyone at professional distance. That happens to overlap with my life, but that doesn't make it wrong." A longer pause, then, "How are you doing?" "With the business diversification." "Getting there." Secured a few new clients, including Margaret Patterson. Between her projects and some smaller jobs, I'm at about 70% of where I need to be. Not comfortable yet, but manageable. Margaret called you? I didn't know that. She made it very clear it was personal business, not related to Ross development. I believe her. Another pause. I miss talking to you. Is that allowed under our 3-month rule? Luke stared at his phone, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. The honest answer was that he missed talking to her too, missed their late-night strategy sessions, and her dry sense of humor in the way she listened like his words actually mattered. But admitting that felt dangerous, like acknowledging a crack in the dam that was keeping his emotions contained. "Yeah," he typed finally. "That's allowed. Missing someone doesn't mean acting on it. It just means being honest about how you feel." "Then I miss you. And not just the help with business strategy. I miss the person who challenged me to be better and didn't let me hide behind professional distance." "I miss you too," Luke admitted, "but we still need this time. You need to prove yourself without distractions, and I need to make sure I'm not just drawn to someone because they needed help. We both deserve better than building something on crisis and convenience." "I know." "You're right. Doesn't make it easier, but you're right." They texted sporadically after that, never quite managing to maintain complete distance, but also never crossing the line into something that would derail their separate work. Evelyn sent updates about board responses to her quarterly projections. Luke shared frustrations about difficult clients and small victories in building his new portfolio. They kept it light, professional adjacent, carefully avoiding anything that felt too personal or too much like the intimacy they were supposedly taking a break from. Week 6 brought Jason's science fair, held in the elementary school gymnasium on a Saturday afternoon. Luke had helped Jason build an elaborate volcano demonstration complete with multiple eruption chambers and a detailed poster explaining the geological processes involved. His son was vibrating with excitement and nervousness as they set up the display. "What if the judges don't get it?" Jason fretted, adjusting his poster for the 7th time. "What if my explanation doesn't make sense?" "Then you adjust and explain it differently," Luke said, straightening the tablecloth around their display. "You know this stuff inside and out, buddy. Just be yourself and share what you love about volcanoes. That enthusiasm matters more than perfect explanations." "Mr. Harper!" A familiar voice called across the gymnasium. Angela was weaving through the crowd with Evelyn Ross in tow, both women carrying clipboards and wearing volunteer badges. "Look who's joining our judging panel. Evelyn's been volunteering with the science program for the past month, and we've put her expertise to good use." Luke's eyes met Evelyn's across the space, and he saw his own surprise reflected back. She'd mentioned volunteering but hadn't said anything about actually judging the fair. She looked different than she had at the board meeting, more relaxed, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked like someone who belonged at an elementary school science fair, not like a CEO managing a billion-dollar company. "Ms. Ross!" Jason bounced on his toes. "Are you really judging? Do you want to see our volcano? We added 3 eruption chambers this time, and Dad helped me calculate the chemical ratios for different lava viscosities." "I would love to see it," Evelyn said warmly, crouching down to Jason's eye level. "But I have to save my official evaluation for the judging period. How about you give me a preview of what makes your project special?" Jason launched into an enthusiastic explanation that covered tectonic plates, magma chambers, and the difference between shield volcanoes and stratovolcanoes. Evelyn listened with obvious attention, asking questions that demonstrated she actually understood what Jason was talking about. Luke watched them interact and felt something shift permanently in his chest. This wasn't crisis bonding. This wasn't convenience. This was a woman who had spent 6 weeks volunteering at an elementary school science program because a 6-year-old boy had shared his passion for volcanoes at a barbecue. This was someone building connections slowly and genuinely, without any expectation of return. Angela appeared at Luke's elbow, her expression smug. "So, you two maintaining that distance you were so adamant about?" "We're trying," Luke said quietly. "You're failing, but in the best possible way." Angela squeezed his arm. "She's been wonderful with the kids, Luke. Patient, engaged, actually interested instead of just checking boxes for community service hours. The teachers love her, the kids respond to her, and she shows up every single week without fail. That's not someone going through motions. That's someone building something real." Luke watched Evelyn sketch a diagram for Jason, explaining how different types of volcanic eruptions produce different rock formations. His son was hanging on every word, his face lit with the joy of finding an adult who took his interest seriously. "Yeah," Luke agreed. "I'm starting to notice that." The fair proceeded with the organized chaos typical of elementary school events. Luke watched from a distance as Evelyn moved through the displays with the other judges, taking time with each project, asking thoughtful questions, making kids light up with her genuine interest. She was good at this, he realized, good at connecting with people when she let herself stop performing and just be present. When the judges finally returned to announce winners, Jason was practically vibrating with anticipation. 3rd place went to a project about solar energy. 2nd place went to an elaborate experiment about plant growth. And 1st place, to Luke's surprise and Jason's absolute joy, went to their volcano demonstration. The judges were particularly impressed by the scientific accuracy of your geological explanations, the head judge announced, and by your ability to make complex concepts accessible and exciting. Congratulations, Jason Harper. Jason threw himself at Luke, nearly knocking him over with the force of his hug. Dad, we won. Did you hear? We won 1st place. I heard, buddy. I'm so proud of you. Luke held his son close, blinking against unexpected tears. This, Jason's joy, his success, his passion for learning, this was what mattered. This was worth protecting, worth building a life around, worth every sacrifice Luke had made over the past 6 years. He looked up to find Evelyn watching them from across the gym, her expression soft with something that looked like longing. Their eyes met, And in that moment, Luke understood what the past 6 weeks had actually been about. Not distance, not preventing feelings from developing, but rather figuring out whether what they felt could exist outside of crisis, whether it could survive in the mundane and beautiful reality of normal life. It could. It had. It was. After the awards ceremony, as parents and kids celebrated with donated cookies and juice boxes, Evelyn approached them hesitantly. "Congratulations, Jason. You earned that first place." She held out her hand to shake formally, and Jason grabbed it with enthusiasm. "Thank you for judging and for asking good questions about pyroclastic flows. Nobody else knows what those are." "Well, I had a very enthusiastic teacher show me his volcano project at a barbecue a few weeks ago. I learned a lot." Evelyn glanced at Luke. "Could I talk to you for a minute, privately?" Luke nodded, asking Angela to watch Jason. They stepped outside into the spring afternoon, the sounds of the fair muffled through the gymnasium walls. "I need to tell you something," Evelyn said, turning to face him. "The board met yesterday. My father called for an early vote despite the 3-month agreement, claimed he had new evidence of mismanagement. Except I'd spent the past 6 weeks documenting every decision, every success, every partnership. When he presented his case, I presented mine. It wasn't even close." Luke's heart rate picked up. "What happened?" "The board voted 6-1 to affirm my leadership and remove my father from any operational oversight. He retains his board seat but has no authority to interfere with day-to-day management. Margaret actually made a motion to extend my contract for another 5 years with expanded autonomy. It passed unanimously." "Evelyn, that's incredible." Luke pulled her into a hug without thinking, then immediately stepped back. "Sorry, Don't apologize." She caught his hand, holding it between both of hers. "I came here today planning to just judge the fair and leave. Maintain the distance we agreed on for another 6 weeks. But then I watched you with Jason, and I watched him light up talking about something he loves, and I realized I'm tired of maintaining distance from something that makes me feel more alive than I've felt in years." "We agreed on 3 months," Luke said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We did. And I understand if you need that full time. But Luke, I've spent 6 weeks building relationships in your community, showing up every week, trying to prove that I can do this, be part of something real instead of just visiting. I've had coffee with Angela. I've helped Mrs. Chen with her grocery shopping. I've spent hours with elementary school kids talking about science. I'm not trying to insert myself into your life as an outsider. I'm trying to build my own connections that happen to overlap with yours, because that's what people do when they're falling in love with someone." The words hung in the spring air between them. "Falling in love?" Luke repeated quietly. "Too fast? Too much? Too honest?" Evelyn smiled shakily. "I'm not good at this, Luke. I don't know the right timing or the appropriate pace. But I know that when I think about the future, I see you in it. I see Jason showing me volcanic rocks, and Angela hugging me without warning, and Marcus making terrible jokes at barbecues. I see myself belonging somewhere instead of just performing belonging." Luke thought about the past 6 weeks, about maintaining distance that had felt increasingly artificial, about watching her build genuine connections with his community, about the way his chest had tightened when he saw her crouching down to Jason's level. He thought about Sarah, about what she'd want for him, about what it meant to risk opening his heart again. "I'm terrified," he admitted, "of getting this wrong, of Jason getting hurt, of building something that doesn't last and having to explain to my son why another person disappeared from his life. I'm terrified too, of not being enough, of failing at relationships the way I've always failed, of you realizing I'm too damaged or too difficult or too much work." Evelyn stepped closer. "But I'm more terrified of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what could have happened if I'd been brave enough to try. Jason asked me last week if you were my friend like Marcus and Angela." Luke reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture intimate and tender. "I told him, yeah, you could be, if we figured out how to make it work. What I didn't tell him was that I wanted you to be more than that I'd been wanting it since that barbecue when you sat in the grass with volcano foam on your expensive jeans and asked genuine questions about how normal people build relationships." "So what do we do?" Evelyn asked. "Because I don't want to pressure you, and I understand if you need more time, but I also need you to know that I'm all in. I've spent 6 weeks proving to myself that what I feel is real, that it survives outside of crisis, that I can actually do this relationship thing if it's with someone who believes I'm capable of growth. Luke thought about the question, about all the very good reasons to be cautious. Then he thought about Angela's words, that life was uncertain, and that wasn't a reason to avoid living it. He thought about Jason's joy at winning first place, and the way Evelyn had genuinely celebrated with him. He thought about 6 years of being careful, of keeping himself contained, of building walls that protected him, but also isolated him. "We do it slowly," he said finally. "We keep building what you've started. Connections with my friends, time with Jason, normal life stuff without the pressure of defining exactly what this is. We see if it works when there's no crisis to bond over, just regular Tuesday evenings and homework help and grocery shopping. We give it time to develop roots instead of forcing it to bloom before it's ready." "I can do slow," Evelyn said. "I'm good at deliberate and methodical. It's impulsive I struggle with." "Good, because I'm good at impulsive and terrible at deliberate, so between us we might actually balance out." Luke pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers. "Fair warning. Dating a single father is complicated. Jason comes first, always. There will be canceled plans and limited spontaneity, and a lot of conversations about volcanic eruptions. If that's not something you can handle—" "Luke," Evelyn cut him off gently. "I spent the morning judging elementary school science projects, and I loved every minute of it. I think I can handle some volcanic conversations." He kissed her then, soft and careful, a promise rather than a demand. She kissed him back with equal tenderness, her hands coming up to frame his face. It felt like coming home and stepping into something new all at once, familiar and terrifying and exactly right. When they broke apart, Evelyn was smiling, a real smile, unguarded and genuine. "So, should we go back inside before Angela sends a search party?" "Probably. She's definitely watching through the window right now, making plans for our entire future." "Is she the type to push for quick engagements and elaborate weddings?" "Absolutely. You'll need to set firm boundaries or we'll be married by summer." Luke took her hand, lacing their fingers together naturally. "You ready for this? Because once we walk back in there together, everyone will know. There's no maintaining professional distance in a community this small." "I'm ready. Are you?" Luke thought about the question, about Jason waiting inside with his first place ribbon, about the friends who'd supported him through the hardest years of his life, about this woman who'd walked into his workshop desperate and had somehow become essential. He thought about Sarah and the life they'd planned, and about the different but equally valuable life he was building now. "Yeah," he said. "I'm ready." They walked back into the gymnasium hand in hand, and Luke watched Angela's face light up with triumph across the room. Jason noticed immediately, running over with his ribbon still pinned to his shirt. "Are you and Miss Ross going to hang out more now?" he asked with the directness of someone who hadn't learned to be subtle yet. "Yeah, buddy, if that's okay with you." Luke crouched down to Jason's level. "But that doesn't mean anything changes with us. You're still the most important person in my life, and that's never going to be different." "I know that, Dad." Jason rolled his eyes with 6-year-old exasperation. "But it's also okay to have other people you care about. That's what Mrs. Chen says. She says hearts get bigger when you love more people, not smaller." Luke pulled his son into a hug, overwhelmed by the wisdom of children and the community that had helped raise this remarkable kid. "Mrs. Chen is right. Hearts do get bigger. Plus, Ms. Ross knows about volcanic rock formation, and that's really cool." Jason pulled back with a grin. "Can she come to our house sometime and see my rock collection?" "I would be honored to see your rock collection," Evelyn said solemnly. "I have a feeling I'll learn a lot." The weeks that followed established a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Evelyn showed up for family dinners at Luke's house, learning to cook simple meals alongside Jason and tolerating the chaos of a household that ran on 6-year-old schedules. She attended more barbecues, gradually relaxing into the casual friendships that Luke's community offered. She helped Jason build increasingly elaborate geological experiments and sat through lengthy documentaries about supervolcanoes without complaint. Luke visited her office occasionally, understanding her world better now that he saw how she balanced the demands of leadership with the values she'd fought to protect. He met more of her team, saw firsthand how she'd built a company culture that valued both results and integrity. He watched her navigate board meetings with Gerald still present, but neutered. His influence reduced to occasional sniping that the other board members largely ignored. They moved slowly, deliberately, building something sustainable rather than dramatic. There were awkward moments and difficult conversations about boundaries and expectations. There were times when Luke's protectiveness of Jason clashed with Evelyn's desire to be more involved. There were moments when her work demands conflicted with his need for reliability and presence. But they worked through each challenge with the same commitment they'd brought to that first crisis: honesty, respect, and a willingness to prioritize the relationship over their individual comfort. 3 months after the science fair, Evelyn showed up at Luke's workshop unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon. He looked up from a welding project to find her standing in the doorway with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I have something to tell you," she said without preamble, "and I need you to let me finish before you respond." Luke set down his torch, sudden anxiety tightening his chest. "Okay." Ross Development is launching a new community partnership program. We're committing 20% of our annual budget to projects that prioritize social impact over pure profit: affordable housing, community centers, public space development. The board approved it unanimously last week after reviewing the success metrics from our existing community-focused projects. She paused, her expression serious. "I want to offer you a 5-year contract as our primary fabrication partner for these projects. It would be substantial work, consistent revenue, exactly the kind of stability you've been building toward." Luke's mind raced, seeing both the opportunity and the complication. "Evelyn, let me finish." She stepped closer. "I know how this looks. I know it seems like I'm using our personal relationship to award contracts, which is exactly what we were worried about. But this isn't favoritism. It's recognition of demonstrated quality and shared values. You're the best fabricator I've worked with, and your commitment to doing things right aligns perfectly with what we're trying to build. I wouldn't offer this if you weren't genuinely the right person for the work." "What does the board think?" Luke asked carefully. "Margaret actually suggested it. She's seen your work on the projects I contracted for her company, and she made the case that you were exactly the kind of vendor we needed for community-focused development. Someone who understands that quality matters more than cutting corners, who treats every project with respect regardless of prestige." Evelyn pulled a folder from her bag. "But I need you to understand something. If you take this contract, people will assume it's because of our relationship. Gerald will definitely use it as ammunition to claim I'm making decisions based on personal bias rather than business merit. There will be scrutiny and questions and probably some uncomfortable attention." Luke took the folder, scanning the terms inside. The numbers were more than fair. They were generous without being suspiciously so. The project descriptions aligned perfectly with the kind of work he wanted to be doing. It was everything he'd been building toward. It was also undeniably complicated by their personal relationship. "What do you think I should do?" he asked. "I think you should take the contract if the work interests you and the terms are acceptable. I think you should reject it if you're only considering it because of me or if it makes you uncomfortable." Evelyn met his eyes directly. "But I also think that we can't let fear of other people's opinions dictate every decision we make. You're qualified for this work. You've earned it through 3 years of excellent performance. The fact that we're also building a personal relationship doesn't negate your professional value." Luke thought about the question from multiple angles. The work itself was exactly what he wanted: meaningful projects that served real community needs. The terms were sustainable and fair. The partnership aligned with both his values and his business goals. The complication was real, but so was the opportunity. "I'll take it," he said finally. "On one condition: I want a performance review clause that allows either party to terminate the contract if my work quality declines, or if the partnership isn't serving the company's interests. I need to know that I'm keeping this contract because I'm delivering value, not because we're dating." "I can live with that." Evelyn's smile was relieved. "Though for the record, I have no doubt about your ability to deliver value. You're incapable of doing work that's less than excellent." "You say that now. Wait until I'm stressed about a deadline and snapping at everyone." Luke pulled her into his arms, the gesture natural now after months of slow building. "Thank you for believing in my work and for separating personal from professional even when it's complicated." "That's what you do for people you love," Evelyn said quietly. You support their success without controlling it. The words registered a beat later. People you love? Yeah. She looked up at him, vulnerable and certain all at once. Is that okay? Or is it too fast? I can take it back if... Luke kissed her, stopping the words. When he pulled back, he was smiling. It's not too fast. It's exactly right. I love you too. Turns out falling for someone who barges into your workshop desperate and honest is a pretty solid foundation for a relationship. Who knew crisis bonding could turn into something sustainable? Evelyn laughed against his shoulder. Angela's going to be insufferable when she finds out we're officially together and you're getting a major contract from my company. She'll probably start planning the wedding immediately. She started planning the wedding at the science fair. We're way behind her timeline. Luke held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling grateful for desperate moments and honest conversations and the courage to try again. But we'll go at our own pace. Build something that lasts instead of something that just looks good on paper. Slow and deliberate. I can do that. Evelyn pulled back slightly. Though I should probably warn you that Jason asked me last week if I was going to be his new mom. Luke's heart stopped. What did you tell him? I told him that I hoped someday we could be a family, but that it takes time to build that kind of relationship, and we needed to make sure it was right for everyone involved. Was that okay? That was perfect. Luke felt his eyes sting with unexpected emotion. What did he say? He said that was fine, but could we maybe speed it up a little because he really wanted someone who understood igneous rock formation to help with his next science fair project? And you're not very good at geology. Luke laughed, the sound breaking free from somewhere deep in his chest. That kid, he's got his priorities straight. He does. He also said that you've been happier lately, and he likes seeing you smile more. Evelyn's voice was soft. He's a pretty remarkable kid, Luke. You've done an amazing job raising him. We've done an amazing job, Luke corrected. Because it wasn't just me. It was Mrs. Chen and Marcus and Angela and everyone else who showed up when I needed help. That's what I'm learning, that building something good doesn't mean doing it alone. It means letting people in and trusting that they'll care as much as you do. They stood in his workshop, surrounded by the tools of his trade and the evidence of work he'd built from nothing, and Luke felt the pieces of his life settling into a pattern he hadn't expected, but deeply wanted. A son who was thriving, a business that was sustainable, a community that supported him, and a woman who'd started as a desperate request and become someone essential. It wasn't the life he'd planned 6 years ago, standing in that hospital room, holding an infant, and trying to figure out how to survive. But it was a good life, maybe even a great one. Come to dinner tonight, he said. Jason's making spaghetti, which means the kitchen will be a disaster, and the sauce will be weirdly sweet because he can't help adding extra sugar. But it'll be us, and it'll be real, and I want you there. I'll be there, Evelyn promised. I'll even help with the dishes. Now I know you love me. Nobody volunteers for dishes with Jason's cooking. They kissed again, longer this time, a promise of more to come. When Luke finally walked Evelyn to her car, he found Mrs. Chen watching from her front porch with undisguised satisfaction. About time you two figured it out, she called. I was starting to worry you'd both overthink yourselves into staying single forever. How long have you been watching? Luke called back. Long enough to know you're finally letting yourself be happy. Sarah would approve, you know. She always said you needed someone who challenged you to be better. The words settled over Luke like a blessing. He waved to Mrs. Chen, watched Evelyn drive away with plans to return in a few hours, and headed inside to find Jason already pulling out ingredients for dinner. Ms. Evelyn's coming over, right? His son asked, without looking up from the pasta box he was examining. Because I told her I'd show her my new geode and explain about crystalline structures. She's coming. And Jay? I need to tell you something important. Jason looked up, suddenly serious in the way kids got when they sensed significant conversations coming. Okay. Evelyn and I are dating, like, officially, which means she's going to be around more, and she's going to be important to me the way Marcus and Angela are important. That doesn't change anything about you and me. You're still the most important person in my life. But it does mean our family is growing a little. Is that okay with you? Jason considered this with the gravity of someone weighing important information. Then he grinned. Does this mean she'll help with my science projects? Because you're really bad at geology, Dad. Like, really bad. Yes, she'll help with science projects, among other things. Cool. Can we still have spaghetti night every Tuesday? Always. That's non-negotiable. Then it's okay with me. Plus, Mrs. Chen says people need more than one person to love them, and Evelyn seems nice and she knows about volcanic rock. Jason turned back to his pasta preparations. Also, can we get a cat? Evelyn said she likes cats. We're not getting a cat. But Evelyn likes them. We can discuss it later, much later. Luke ruffled his son's hair, feeling the familiar weight of parental responsibility mixed with something new. Hope for a future that included more than just survival and routine. That evening, with Evelyn at their dinner table and Jason explaining crystalline structures with the aid of his geode and several dramatic gestures, Luke looked around his small kitchen and felt something he hadn't felt in 6 years. Not just contentment or satisfaction or relief that they were managing, joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy at the life they were building together. It had started with a desperate woman stumbling into his workshop asking for help she had no right to expect. It had developed through crisis and complications, through honest conversations and slow building, through the kind of messy, imperfect growth that characterized real relationships rather than fairy tales. And now, months later, it had become something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth the risk of opening his carefully controlled life to uncertainty and possibility. Evelyn caught his eye across the table, smiling at something Jason was saying about mineral formations. She looked happy. She looked like she belonged. And Luke realized that somewhere along the way, he'd stopped seeing her as an outsider entering his world. She'd become part of it, woven into the fabric of his life through shared meals and science fairs, through supporting his business and building friendships with his community, through showing up consistently and proving that she was capable of the kind of love that sustained rather than consumed. "Dad, you're not listening," Jason complained. "I was explaining about sedimentary versus igneous rock formation, and you're just staring at Ms. Evelyn all weird. Sorry, buddy, continue with your geological exposition. You're doing it again." Jason threw up his hands in exasperation, but he was grinning. "Grown-ups are so weird when they like each other." "We are," Evelyn agreed, her eyes warm on Luke's face. "But sometimes weird is good. Sometimes it's exactly right." And watching his son return to his enthusiastic explanations while the woman he loved listened with genuine interest, Luke had to agree. Sometimes weird was perfect. Sometimes the life you built from crisis and courage turned into something better than anything you could have planned. Sometimes desperate moments and honest conversations led exactly where they were supposed to. Home.